across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense, and I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much, as always, for your company, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. It is always, as you know, fabulous to have your company. Now, don't forget, also, you can go to my YouTube page, the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. Hit subscribe, never have to miss a thing. I like to think we had a stonking show yesterday. Goodness me, quite a lot to talk about. Most of it, let's be honest, involved the BBC. And once again, they are leading the news. They just can't stop themselves, can they? But coming up in this hour, we are going to talk about Donald Trump threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion, unless he gets a full apology by Friday over the Panorama programme, that completely doctored footage of his speech ahead of the January 6 riots back in 2021. Meanwhile, BBC boss Tim Davie is going to address the corporation's staff today. As he entered the BBC earlier, he insisted he was proud of everyone at the BBC and they're all wonderful. These people are utterly deluded. They haven't got a clue what is going on. Other BBC chiefs insisting, of course, they are not institutionally biased. This is all just a big conspiracy by nasty right-wingers like me, apparently. They are completely and utterly mad. They do not realise that actually they are the people who are undermining the BBC, not people like me. Also going to go to tried and trusted older stories, such as the madness of the migrant policy, as a second small boat migrant removed under Keir Starmer's flagship one-in, one-out swapsy deal with the French was basically crossed back from France to the UK. We broke that on the news and the show yesterday. But the illegal migrant arrived back on Sunday. He was identified, so it's all a big success, everybody. It's all a great success. He's set to be deported again. It's all going terribly well. Plus, ahead of the budget in just a couple of weeks now, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has signalled in an interview with the Beeb that she will be scrapping the two-child benefit cap as she prepares to raise billions of pounds with a manifesto-breaking raid on income tax in the upcoming budget. She said no young person should be penalised for being born into a large family. No, of course they shouldn't, but that's why their parents should get work and have children that they can afford to keep themselves, instead of expecting you and me to pay extra taxes to pay for them. Eh? Mad idea. Oh, by the way, small matter, unemployment has gone up to 5%. Again, it's all going terribly well. And of course, at 11 o'clock today, in less than an hour, people across the country will come together in a 2-minute silence on Armistice Day to commemorate the end of the First World War and all of our fallen heroes. We will, of course, be joining that 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock, and I hope you will join us as well. So much to talk about. I want to hear from you on any of the topics, but let's face it, in particular, Donald Trump threatening to sue the Beeb for $1 billion, bearing in mind, of course, that any money the BBC has is yours and my money. So I'd rather we didn't pay $1 billion to a billionaire president of the United States. Thanks very much. He wants a full apology by Friday night from the BBC. They've already given one, to be fair. The chairman, Samir Sham, has already given one for that Panorama documentary. But what do you make of that? Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. Get in touch on text at 87222. You can also get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. And I'd also love to hear from you just about all the comments we've had from senior BBC people, whether it's presenters like Nick Robinson or the outgoing Director General, or indeed the outgoing Head of News, who just appeared to be utterly unaware of just how bad things are and how little trust people have in the BBC. Apart from, it turns out, Ed Davey, who loves it, but mainly still also thinks it's far too right-wing. I mean, the world has gone mad, folks. Anyway, joining us for the chat today is someone who definitely hasn't gone mad. Always great to have him in the studio. Editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. A very good morning to you. Where do you want to start? I mean, we do need to start with Donald Trump threatening to sue the BBC, unless he gets his apology. But he has already had an apology. But there is no doubt, he says, look, this was malicious. He wants a full and fair retraction. He's, you know, he said, you know, look, this does have influence. Now, there's a big debate about, did this show go out on BBC iPlayer in the States? I mean, would it have swung the election? Would it have affected people's view of Donald Trump? But there's no doubt at all that this was a totally unacceptable breach of the most basic journalistic ethics.
No, absolutely. And when, before this threat of a lawsuit emerged, people were even getting upset that the White House had talked about it at all, that you had a foreign government trying to dictate who should or shouldn't run the BBC. Of course they were going to take issue with this. They were caught out lying, misrepresenting, pushing misinformation about a political figure who we all know that barely anyone inside the BBC probably has a kind word to say about, with the exception of the people who do real jobs like cleaning the place and tidying up. It's like, it's obviously
Come on, collecting the copies of The Guardian at the end of the day, putting them in the bin.
The well-thumbed copies of The Guardian that are left there. It's clocking off time. But no, it's so, like you, I don't really want to be in a situation where the state broadcaster, taxpayer funded, is having to shell out a lot of money to someone who frankly doesn't need it. But at the same time, they picked this fight, not just with that edit, but with their coverage over many, many years.
Of everything!
And they should probably have expected this kind of thing, given the fact that Trump, since he came back to office, has been pretty keen to pursue various different media organisations in the courts and elsewhere for when they have misrepresented him. So it's one of those things where, of course, this was going to happen, even though it's regrettable that we're talking about the BBC being sued for a bit.
Look, and this is not Trump derangement syndrome. This is, again, I talk about facts, and I'm not party political on these things, because I will criticise, parties of which I hold a very, big and even friends of mine. I mean, you know me, I'll take on people. You know perfectly well I'm friends with Richard Tyson. You know perfectly well I'm friends with Nigel Farage. Doesn't remotely stop me when I'm in my job when I'm criticising them for things that I think they've said or done wrong. I've got no issue. I'm equal opportunities on this front. It is a matter of fact that Donald Trump lies 15 times before breakfast, and routinely does it. He says things he knows categorically to be untrue. It's what he does. Doesn't matter. It's utterly irrelevant. The job of the media is to hold him to account, okay? Simple as that. As it is to hold any politician of any political hue to account. You had a media in America and the BBC who did not hold Joe Biden to account, who covered up the fact they knew. Everybody in Washington knew this guy was completely senile and unfit for office at that point, but they just keep quiet about it. Everyone knew that Kamala Harris was utterly unfit, but they carried on with all that nonsense as well. So they're all just as bad as each other. But the reality is, just because a politician has a history of lying doesn't mean that the coverage, the media coverage should go down to that level. The duty of care. And this idea that the BBC chiefs keep putting out this, we are still the most trusted media organisation in Britain and the world. Yeah, it's because of the trust that when you do lie, and yes, that Panorama documentary was a lie. It was a blatant, malicious, deliberate lie. There was no other explanation for just, I'm just going to completely accidentally put two bits of a speech together, 54 minutes apart, completely by chance. Sod off. That was deliberate. It was a deliberate, politically motivated act. There's no doubt at all in my mind about that. But they cannot say, well, it's because we're trusted, you've got to take our word for it. No, it's because you're trusted that the damage is greater. Because people, in the same way we talk about Gaza, when the BBC says, Hamas figures are this and children are dying and the IDF bombed this hotel. People say, well, it must be true because the BBC wouldn't lie to us. And that's why it's more egregious a crime.
And we know this in the media, in politics, in life. Trust is very slow and difficult to build and very easy to break. And to just brush this off as if it was one bad edit, as everyone is saying, doesn't take into account how serious that particular edit was. It was explicitly trying to make it look as if Donald Trump was explicitly inciting the mob on January 6th.
Which he did not.
To go and attack the Capitol, as they later on did. But also, people are pretending as if that memo, which was produced by a former kind of BBC external advisor, which has since been leaked to the Telegraph, as if it's only about that one single edit. That is not even the half of it. You talk about the Gaza issue. The allegations that are laid at the feet of BBC Arabic are staggering, giving hundreds of on-air appearances to outright anti-Semites who say things like, we should burn the Jews as Hitler.
Yeah, it's not a subtle, it's not a, was he, wasn't he?
Exactly.
People who genuinely celebrated the rape and murder and kidnappings on October the 7th openly on their feed. They weren't even doing it on a private feed. They were doing it on their own public feed.
And being booked to go on BBC Arabic. There was also fascinating revelations in there about the fact that if you look at the contrast between how the BBC News covered Gaza, which wasn't always great, there's many accusations in there as well, and how BBC Arabic covered Gaza, usually expects a lot of crossover. During one particular period, there was something like 19 stories about the plight of the Israeli hostages. There were none on BBC Arabic. Also, BBC Arabic seemed to give a lot of credence to statements given by Hamas, by Hezbollah, essentially just laundering their propaganda to an even greater extent than we've used to with the BBC.
I didn't know it was possible for them to do it to an even greater extent. But look, there's no doubt at all about it. So Tim Davies is going to address staff. On his way in to the office today, as with Deborah Furness when she went into the office yesterday, and Turness, the outgoing head of news, and she insisted that there was no institutional bias at the BBC. I mean, again, utterly delusional. Tim Davie has said he's very, very proud of BBC journalists. He said, I'm very, very proud of BBC journalists in this building. We're doing... Sorry, I'm going to try and read now. They're doing work I think is incredibly important. I want to thank every one of them. They're doing a wonderful job. The BBC is going to be thriving and I support every one of the team. I'm very proud of them. You support every one of the team? I mean, you shouldn't be supporting everyone. I've never worked in an office where every single person is doing a great job and is wonderful. And I don't know how many things they can have. Every documentary, about Gaza, every bit of footage on the coverage of the trans debate, the coverage of the climate change nonsense, the absolute piffle that they put out on that topic. It's been absolutely outrageous. I mean, look, there's an amazing story today, and it just ties in just perfectly. A veteran BBC broadcast journalist, Catherine Lang, she's a former chief writer for BBC News, and she claims she was forced out of the BBC over her gender-critical views. When you said gender-critical, I'm talking about, and this is a meaningless phrase for most normal people, right? It means knowing that men aren't women.
Yeah, the sort of reality believing.
Reality believing. How dare you believe it? She's a journalist, right? She's told the Times that she was pitching gender-critical stories, i.e. stories about, how trans ideology was not good for women and women's rights, sort of stuff you'd think that women's rights used to be something the BBC might have cared about, the bunch of lefties that they are. But basically she said there was this, the one-sided stories, but she said basically when she actually had a story that was actually accepted, and even though it was supposedly gender critical, other people couldn't speak out, couldn't say anything. She would get completely blanked, and she was accused of having an agenda. And when actually she did get one accepted, the other journalists actually messaged her privately to say, keep going, we're behind you, but felt too afraid to speak out. If you work in a news organisation where you can't give your honestly held views, that's not a news organisation, that's a propaganda organisation.
Absolutely. And what's so difficult about this issue is that the BBC don't really know that they're doing it. I think when Deborah Turness says, yes, I've resigned, to kind of praise it, but yes, I've resigned over all of this bias, but there isn't any bias in the BBC, I kind of think I think that's sincere. I think she believes it. I think the problem is just that old...
So what's she resigned over then?
Well, exactly. I mean, but it's one probably because of the nefarious coup which has been launched by Nigel Farage or whatnot, if X and Blue Sky are to be believed. But it's the water that they swim in. They don't realise that they are constantly lying, either explicitly or by omission. They don't realise the extent to which what they select to report on is shaped by their own particular agenda.
Welfare is good, open borders is good, trans is good, women who complain about it are just transphobic as opposed to concerned about their own safety and their own hard-won rights.
No, they
Brexit bad, Nigel Farage bad, Corbyn probably quite good. I mean, I've done a lot of work at the BBC, and I'm sure you've gone in their offices very often. I also, for my sins, and I know this was right, I spent a year, 3 months and 2 days, not that I was counting at The Guardian, as a news reporter, between other jobs. They genuinely don't know they're doing it. You're quite right. They live in such a tiny bubble. I don't know. You come from the left, don't you? Like in your ideological approach movement. I think most people live in a world where we know people of many different. I know people who've got politics vastly to left, vastly to right, mostly in the middle. I mean, my own family. Christmas Day lunch, conversations about anything and everything, massive big political debates. I mean, it's not difficult for anyone on the right. I find people on the left seem to find it much harder. But people on the right tend to move with, have friends and family members they speak to, across all the spectrum. But a lot of people on the left, they just literally live in that little vacuum of lefties.
Yeah, and metropolitan liberals in particular. And I think that's one thing that we saw with the Brexit vote. It's like a statistical thing. Remainers are much more likely not to know Leavers, whereas Leavers are much more likely to know Remainers.
Which is why they were so shocked.
Yeah, and so appalled and so intolerant. Because,
who were these people?
Tend to be much more tolerant of people if you know people who hold that view and they're in your life and you realise that human beings and not demons or what have you. But and this is a problem if you've got an organisation who draws from a particular social base from a particular area.
The lanyard classes.
The lanyard classes. You know, these are all people who, broadly speaking, went to the same universities. All broadly speaking, live in London, although once a month they might be required to go up to Salford for an evening. It's that kind of groupthink which is generated by that, and then you point it out and they don't even necessarily see it. That being said, it has got particularly outrageous, not just the Trump edit, but the way in which it was justified and defended was really interesting, because people are essentially saying, yes, that was a misrepresentation, but the thrust of it is correct because he did incite that mob, didn't he? And he does lie all the time, which I think it was Gordon Rayner in the Telegraph made this point. That just sounds like, you know, when the police can't get someone for one crime, so they fit them up for another one. That is not what journalists committed to truth and impartiality.
And it doesn't make it okay. But also, I mean, again, you look at, I mean, Jonathan Munro is the guy who's been appointed as the interim head of news instead of Deborah Turness, the BBC. He was actually mentioned in the Prescott report. This is the big report that was in the Telegraph as of from last week, which exposed all of this. And at the editorial sort of guidance meeting back in May, when they discussed this whole Trump documentary, Jonathan Munro, so the guy who's currently the solution to the problem of Deborah Turness and is standing in, he said there was no attempt to mislead the audience about the content or nature of Mr. Trump's speech before the riot at the Capitol. It's normal practice to edit speeches into short-form clips. I mean, he thinks it's okay. He thinks it's okay. He's also, by the way, one of those who approved the Cliff Richard police raid. Okay. He has also insisted that there has not been any of the Gaza documentaries and all of that they've not been an issue. He has defended coverage of Gaza. He is, as I think Sarah Vine pointed out, Daily Mail columnist, he's part of the problem, not part of the solution. We've got MPs debating the BBC in the Commons today. Ed Davies appears to be the only frontline politician who's massively supporting the BBC, but his only criticism of the BBC seems to be needs to be protected from Nigel Farage, but it's been too beholden to Nigel Farage. There is this obsession that everyone has with, oh, Ed Davies only been on Question Time half the number of times of Nigel Farage has been. Nigel Farage has been the leader of a political party in this country, a prominent political party that's had massive influence on what has happened at elections, whether he's got elected or not, for the past, 15, 20 years. Ed Davey has not been leader of the Lib Dem party that long. There are other people to sort of choose from that party to have on the show. I mean, it's not complicated to understand why Nigel Farage would have been on Question Time more than the leader of the Lib Dems. Also, much more entertainment value, much more, interesting political creature and communicator. Ed Davey is a man so boring he's had to take to, jumping 12 Decker buses on a motorbike in order just to grab any attention. Like, he's so... Yeah. This constant complaint about Farage, or the constant complaint about the BBC in general being in hock to the right. It's just... this conspiracy theory in recent days that this is a concerted coup on the part of the one or two Tories who hang around the BBC board. If this is a right-wing coup, it's the lamest in history, and certainly all the people in the building haven't noticed that it's gone on, because they continued to pump out this kind of one-eyed content and coverage. But also, again, the BBC that has gone on about whistleblowers, like with the post office scandal, whether it's a hospital scandal, any grooming gangs, whatever, very big on we need to protect the whistleblowers, and yet they've been critical, and everyone, very senior people, briefing newspapers, and some blatant statements from senior people about Robbie Gibb. You say, one of the few Tories on the board. Yes, and he used to work as he was involved with GB News. Yes, he was, and he was involved with worked for the Tories in Downing Street. But I mean, the idea that he's been the one that exposed this Michael Prescott internal report. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, since when does the BBC cover things up and not protect whistleblowers? Oh, OK, when it's about itself. Every single journalist and producer and presenter and executive at the BBC who cares about the BBC should welcome a whistleblower exposing it. Now, these accusations are either false, in which case prove them so, or they are true, in which case you need to deal with them. There is no circumstance when you don't think the whistleblower shouldn't blow the whistle.
Exactly, and that's one thing you've seen them playing the man rather than the ball, if it's in relation to the dossier, the memo that's put together, or Robbie Gibbs' supposed involvement. look at the allegations. This has not raised concerns about bias at the BBC. It is meticulously demonstrated data about particular months in which certain things were covered and other things weren't. Looking at what the BBC is pushing out in terms of push notifications was fascinating. Over, I think it was a 3-month period, they only put out a handful of stories about the asylum question, and most of them were about the plight experienced by illegal migrants when they get to the country. That's clearly slanted. So, again, look at the allegations. If there's anything there that is untrue, then let's address that. But the fact that they're not would indicate that all is true. And then their only defence becomes, well, these are old and we dealt with them at the time. There's still hundreds of them.
You didn't deal with them. Yeah, exactly. And you deliberately tried to keep them quiet. Let's talk about something else. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this. Calls already coming in thick and fast, obviously. 0344 499 1000. The implications to the BBC. The fact that bosses quite clearly do not get it. They're still defending it all. Do get in touch. But I also want to talk about Rachel Reeves. She did an interview with the Beeb yesterday. Clearly signalling she's preparing to scrap the 2-child benefit cap. Also raising income tax. If you don't raise income tax, it's going to be massive spending cuts. I don't want to do massive spending cuts. We know she can't borrow more than she's already borrowing more. And hints at an income tax rise to protect productivity. I mean, genuinely can't even understand the maths on that. I mean, I only did economics as an A-level and part of a degree, but that's way beyond my little brain, I tell you. Meanwhile, news out today, unemployment has risen to 5%, the highest level since 2021, when we were in lockdown and literally people were not allowed to go to work. I mean, this is not going very well at all, is it? But in particular, I mean, I think a lot of us been saying for quite a long time, even before the election. Look, we know that those manifesto pledges don't last the duration. But scrapping the 2-child benefit cap, again, this is something that the Reform Party have talked about doing as well. Properly insane. I am so angry about this. You're going to put my taxes up and taxes of ordinary working people up to pay for people who don't go out to work or work part-time, or only one of them works and mum doesn't work, and who have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids who they can't afford to look after. And you want hard-working families, many of whom will have only 1 child or only 2 children because that's all they can afford on their salaries while they're working full-time, can't afford to buy a bigger home, can't afford to take more time off to have more kids. And they're going to have to pay taxes to fund an extra... I mean, it is an extraordinary sum of money, by the way. It's £3,455 a year more for each child. But Rachel Reeves says, children shouldn't be penalised because they come from a big family. But it's not us penalising them, it's their parents, isn't it?
Well, it's also that if we want to lift more people out of poverty, if you want to ensure that people are having more children, which was the justification that Reform were putting out there, you need to just sort the economy out. I mean, this is the thing. Of course, there should be provision. I don't want a load of
unemployed people having more kids. Sorry, no, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't.
It's one of those things where it's a choice that's been made in this instance for purely political reasons. It's because of the fact that the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party, the kind of soft left, broadly speaking, have got very upset with this government in terms of the decisions it's made, and that this is a sop to them. That's all that it really is. It's the actual implications of it, I think, are entirely secondary. And when you've got an economic picture which is as bleak as it currently is, when the public finances are in such a state, to be making decisions on that basis is unseemly. And especially when you think about the number of mistakes that this government is now basically having to mop up, mistakes it itself has made when it brought in that hike on national insurance, supposedly only for employers. Everyone says this will be a tax on jobs, and now we've seen unemployment hit 5%. So this government came in saying...
I think you'll find, Tom, it's Brexit.
No, exactly, it's Brexit. It's
did you not get that memo?
It's Nigel Farage being on Question Time too many times. There's some complicated reason as to why this isn't their fault. They came in saying they were going to clear up the Tories' mess. It's a very big mess, but they haven't done that. Now they're having to clean up their own mess. It's just... And we're only, 18 months.
The only saving grace we've got is that this will be the second but the last Rachel Reeves budget, but it's going to be bad. They're going to be cleaning up the mess, attempting to mess with the last one, creating a bigger mess this time around. It is going to be an absolute beep show on November the 26th. It really is. It's clear they're going to basically protect everyone in the public. They're going to protect their voters. Basically, hello, you very, very poor, non-productive, or you working in the public sector, you're going to be fine. We're going to take on everyone else, the productive members of society who are actually trying to make a living, who are increasingly paying for everything. It's not going to end well, mainly because half those people, it turns out, are going to leave the country. 10:26 is the time. I'm going to get to your calls up next. Lots more I want to talk about, including the Olympic Committee set to ban, well, they say, trans women from female sports. No, they're going to ban men from women's sports. which would seem obvious to the rest of us, eh? We're going to talk to Sharon Davis, the brilliant, the wonderful Sharon Davis about that up later. Anyway, coming up, we're going to take a break. Take your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to have your say. This is Talk.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk. 10:30 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with me as well. And you guys on the phones, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Michael's done that. He's in Hertfordshire. Michael, what do you make of the American president threatening to sue Auntie Beeb for $1 billion if they don't give a full apology for doctoring that speech of his in the Panorama doc?
Well, I think he should. Also, I'd like to say I think they should take the licence money away from the BBC and give it to talkTV.
Oh,
because
we'd
at
love
least
that,
we're getting the
please.
truth out of you people.
Imagine getting that sort of. I tell you what, it's one of those things. You could probably halve the licence for the BBC and not change the output at all. They are so comedically overstaffed. It's an absolute joke.
Well, I'd like to say a couple of other things if I can.
Go for it.
Do BBC Arabic when the BBC makes these 200 mistakes over a period of time, do they report the mistakes on that side of the BBC? No. I'd like to know that.
Don't think
and the
so.
other thing I'd like to say is any MP with the name of Ed should be banned from Parliament.
Oh, so we Ed, Davey, Ed Miliband. Yeah. No, I don't want anyone banned. I just want them held up to proper scrutiny.
Yes, you're right, but I was half joking.
I knew you were joking, but, you know, we think is, you see, if you've got facts on your side, you never need to censor people or ban people, because you could just argue on the facts and win that way. That's always my argument.
Well, the BBC haven't learnt that lesson, nor has the Labour Party, so
no.
Perhaps we should give lessons out to all these people.
I have a funny feeling that the electorate will be giving them a lesson come 2029.
About it.
Michael, thank you for your call. Appreciate that. Stuart's on the line in Wigan. Hey, Stuart.
Hiya, you all right?
I am all right. How are you?
I'm all right. I just wanted to say that I'll back jump all the way, me. I hope he checks them for everything they've got and shuts the place down.
The only trouble is, it is our money. He would be suing the BBC for our money.
Yeah, well, if they shut them down, I don't care, to be honest. That's money well worth spending, that, as far as I'm concerned. If the BBC were televising the end of the world, I wouldn't watch it.
I mean, they'd be putting some weird spin on it that it was affecting ethnic minorities and trans people more than anyone else, wouldn't they? I mean, we know that. And they'd probably blame it on Israel. But here's the thing. Wouldn't you rather that we had a BBC that went back to being neutral and, was it ever completely, but more neutral, unbiased, giving us some facts, a trusted news organisation, rather than shutting it down?
And when was this? They were covering Jimmy Savile up at 70. So when was this unbiased, honest news organisation? As far as I can see, it would never work.
No, yeah, we just probably didn't have the exposés on it, and we didn't have social media, so we didn't know about it. You've lost complete faith.
I've lost complete faith. I have as much faith in the BBC as I have in coppers. None whatsoever.
That's quite telling. Stuart, appreciate your call. Thank you very much. Apologies for the quality of that live. I wanted to get Stuart on the air. We're going to take another quick break. Going to talk to Mark Littlewood. He's Director of Popular Conservatism about, well, not just Trump and the BBC, but also Rachel Reeves and the child benefit cap and, 5% unemployment. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. 10:36 is the time. Don't forget, of course, we are approaching the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, Armistice Day, and we will, of course, be marking the 2-minute silence to mark our fallen heroes at 11 o'clock. So I hope you'll be joining us for that. In the meantime, though, definitely not silence with Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism, who's joining us. A very good morning to you, Mark.
Hi, Julia. Good to be with you.
Well, I mean, I don't know where we start, mate. I mean, it's just got to talk about the BBC, got to talk about the economy. Two subjects I'm sure you're very much close to your heart. What do you make of Donald Trump threatening to sue the Beeb for $1 billion over that document that was doctored, and unless he gets a full apology? And Tim Davie and Deborah Furness, I keep saying Furness, turning up to the BBC yesterday and today, basically saying, nothing to see here, no bias, everyone's wonderful, it's all fine.
Yeah, they remain delusional even as they resign. It's quite extraordinary. It seems to be that Tim Davie and Deborah Furness, as well as the chairman, Shamir Shah, think there was a sort of a slip of the pen here or there. You know, an accident sort of happened. We accidentally knocked something over. You know, it was an error. It was a mistake. It wasn't. The doctoring of that Trump footage in the Panorama documentary was quite clearly deliberate. It was an editorial decision. Yeah. It's not a slip of the pen.
And there was a purpose behind it.
Yes, quite. It was intended to give the impression that the president had said something and encouraged something that he plainly did not. This is not an error. This is not like accidentally switching off the audio. Right? This is not like getting the colour scheme wrong on the backdrop, on the green screen. This is a deliberate editorial decision. And it seems, I stand to be corrected on this, Julia, but all of the errors seem to be in the same direction, aren't they? Have they ever done something which has unfairly traduced Kamala Harris? How many times have they been too kind to Israel in their reporting? Is quite extraordinary.
Well,
really.
the pro-Pally lot...
errors in the same direction. What does that tell you?
The pro-Pally lot reckon that it's a completely right-wing pro-Israel organisation. I mean, there's no accounting for madness, but there we are. What do you make of Ed Davey basically defending the BBC and basically saying, actually, the problem with the BBC is, you know, it's basically controlled by Nigel Farage to all intents and purposes?
I mean, this is ludicrous, because, I mean, the criticism made by Nigel Farage's opponents is, why is he getting so much airtime when he only has 5 MPs? But the truth is that it's being measured not on his 5 MPs, but the fact that Reform are way ahead in the opinion polls, right? If he had 5 MPs and was only on 3 or 4% of the vote, he wouldn't be getting any coverage. But all broadcasters, I think, need to reflect not just the result of the previous election, but where public opinion sits.
And also, when the Prime Minister's speeches constantly talk about him as the leader of the opposition, effectively, he's brought up constantly when he is setting the agenda on major stories of the day, particularly on immigration and crime. I mean, it's insane for him not to be occasionally interviewed on the BBC. I mean, they even get upset that Nigel Farage's speech is on the BBC, even though a Davies speech will be on the BBC. I mean, this thing, there is, you say, it is utterly delusional. Where do you think it goes from here? I mean, given that the man who is currently standing in for the head of news at the BBC, Jonathan Munro, is somebody who, at the meeting in May of this board where they had this conversation about this internal report from the whistleblower, Michael Prescott, he basically said, he said these exact words, there was no attempt to mislead the audience with that splicing of the Trump video. I mean, he's part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Exactly right. So what I suspect will happen is the BBC will limp on in some sort of semi-delusional fashion. They'll say, you know, mistakes have been made, lessons will be learnt, there'll be a few slaps on the wrists. You know, a couple of people at Panorama will shift seats so they can pretend that mistakes won't be made in future. But over the medium term, Julia, the entire funding model of the BBC is finished. More and more people are simply refusing to pay the licence fee. The intellectual or economic justification for the licence fee is collapsing, not just because of bias in the BBC. I mean, that might be the moral reason to say, I'm not paying for this. This is basically the TV equivalent of The Guardian. It is no longer neutral. But because there are now a plethora of different media outlets available, talkTV, for example. If you were to go way back to the 50s or 60s, the only way that news could really be transmitted to the British public was through a single TV channel or radio channel. So the BBC was sort of performing the same sort of role as the Press Association or Reuters today.
Yeah.
But now there's a plethora of ways of getting information, and the idea that one particular corporation can set itself up as being the wholly neutral, impartial, straight down the line, utterly incorruptible voice compared to the millions of other voices, many of whom would claim the same, is farcical and it's ludicrous. So I actually think the way you save the BBC, not kill it, the way you save it is move it to some sort of subscription model. They might actually see their income streams go up. You know, if you had pay-per-view, you could see them charging £2 or £3 to watch an episode of Traitors rather than £0, for example. But they will also be continually on an hour-to-hour, day-to-day, week-to-week basis having to look at their audiences and what their audiences wanted.
Yeah, I mean,
because if the subscriptions were cancelled, they'd have to change their output.
I'm quite happy for it to be taxpayer-funded news output. I don't see why it should be taxpayer-funded to put Strictly on air. I really don't know why the taxpayer's paying for, the fake tan for some ex-sports star on Strictly. That can be paid for, and ITV could run it or anyone else. I don't see why that issue. But in terms of the BBC news output, I'd be quite happy to pay for it as long as it was strictly neutral. And I'd find it extraordinary how they don't seem to understand this concept. I know, I mean, genuinely, when we do coverage of elections, there are election rules. The only time they were ever fair on Brexit was when they were legally required by Ofcom during the election purdah period to be strictly neutral in terms of the equivalence of guests and the amount of time. And literally, during those election periods, a producer in the studio has to sit and write down, how long someone was on air for and whether you had equivalent guests. So you didn't, like, for instance, put up a leading business person, head of the CPI, up against some random bloke in Sunderland who just happened to be passing by the cameraman at the time, which is what they did previously. But they don't seem to understand that it's possible for them to do that if they wanted to. But Tom Slater is with me in the studio, as we've discussed. We think the issue is they don't even realise they're doing it. They are so imbued with it. But let's also talk about Rachel Reeves, because they do realise what they're doing, and we know perfectly well on November the 26th the budget is going to be our absolute horror show. We know that taxes are going to go up. She's kind of hinted at it already in an interview BBC and various different speeches she gave last week as well, at an income tax rise. For some reason, apparently income tax rise will protect productivity. I don't understand how that would happen. But also, she's hinted very strongly that she will lift the child benefit cap. Now, this is a cap on any child born since April 2017, that for poorer families entitled to universal credit, you're not able to claim for any children after your first two. And we are talking about a very sizable sum, £3,455 a year, that these families are not getting. But apparently, according to all the lefty think tanks and all the lefty MPs, the reason why all these children are in poverty is because they're not getting the child benefit because of this cap, as opposed to because their parents are having too many kids they can't afford and haven't got jobs.
Yeah, I mean, if our present bloated welfare state was the way to solve poverty, we would have cracked it long before now, Julia. We're spending an absolute fortune on cash handouts on a wide range of things. The amount of money that's churned around for either child benefit or, say, housing benefit or universal credit is absolutely colossal. If all of this money, easily the biggest ticket item in government expenditure, hasn't ended poverty in the UK, why will one more heave do it? This is going to help productivity. I mean, ludicrous. I mean, it looks like what she's probably going to do, the speculation is this, isn't it, is that she'll put income tax up twopence but reduce national insurance by twopence, meaning if you pay both, you're in a kind of neutral position. But if you're, say, a pensioner, you'll just see your income tax go up because you don't pay national insurance. So a reduction there won't help you at all. So my parents will get hit. Better
off pensioners. We don't have to be much. You don't have to be very much better off.
No, well, anyone on more than £12,500 a year, right? That will take you through.
You're not on an all-week Caribbean cruise every month, are you?
On your point about how it helps productivity, I mean,
please explain this to me. I'm fascinated.
But it doesn't. I mean, she's going to argue that it's hitting people who are out of work quite hard, and those in work are not really being hit as hard because there's a wash. There's a 2p.
But isn't there an argument against dropping this national insurance, which is a lie because it is a tax, and dropping the national insurance con, because lots of people genuinely still believe, I've paid my stamp.
Yeah.
There's a little pot sitting there, in the Chancellor's office in the Treasury that's got their name on it, and when they retire, then they get that money.
Yeah.
Rubbish. It's already been spent on day one.
No, you're right. I mean, it is to all intents and purposes just a different income tax that's levied. Although I'd quite like to go back to the system where you pay in and there's a pot with your name on it and you're topped up, and that's the money that's been set aside. And if you fall ill or are out of work for 6 months, you dip into your pot, not just general funds. But on the wider picture, You're right, Julia, that I mean, look, if you tax cigarettes more, there's less smoking. If you tax alcohol more, there's less drinking. What do you think happens if you tax work more? There's less working. That's exactly what has happened with the previous national insurance rise.
5% unemployment rate. I mean, the highest since 2021, when people were quite literally legally banned from going to many jobs. That 5%, that is worryingly high for this country.
Oh, yeah.
Given how many people are on the sick.
Yeah,
I mean, given we've got millions, it used to be that we had low unemployment because we had millions on the sick and it hid in it. Well, now we've got both.
Yes, no, I mean, it's a terrible situation, and we're getting fewer and fewer people into the workplace. And the way out of this is you've got to find some very, very substantial reductions in spending that then gives you the room to make substantial reductions in taxation.
And they're not going to do
that.
that.
That's what's basically needed to get things back together. And on this child benefit issue, I don't know why no party has taken up the idea that once you've decided how many kids you wish to sort of help in a family, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, pick a number, whatever you think the fair number is, rather than it being a handout, why isn't it a tax break? So you get about £1,000 per child. But why not say, I'll tell you what, if you have a kid, we'll increase your income tax threshold by 5,000.
Oh,
that would be the equivalent, right?
That would help working parents. Yes.
Correct. So if you're working to try and bring up a family, and that raise in, you get a tax-free sum for that £5,000, that would encourage those who are in work to have kids or give them a break to do it, rather than it being a cash handout benefit of £1,000 a year, potentially going to people who frankly can't afford to have children. I'd switch it that way round.
Yep.
Same cost, different incentives.
Loving that. Great stuff. Mark Littlewood, thank you very much, Director of Popular Conservatism. Tom Slater, listening to all of that, what do you make of it?
No, it's just a reminder, isn't it, that this government is all over the place where the economy is concerned. It would be one thing if it was at least coherent what it is that they were trying to do, but if you're going around saying things that we're going to raise taxes to boost productivity, it's clearly not much coherence there whatsoever. The thing that they're not talking about anymore is growth. That was when they came into government, they said
steely focus.
Exactly, this is all we're going to be about. People were even making Liz Truss jokes. The fact that we're not hearing about that now, I think, is telling.
Very telling. Thank you very much indeed. 10:49 is the time now. We're going to take a quick break. They're going to be talking to historian and military writer Elliot Wilson as we approach the 11 o'clock 2-minute silence to mark Armistice Day. Do stay with us. This is Talk.
fraction of the people that want to come in. They are queuing up to come in by these boats. Nobody has been remotely put off by one in, one out. They take their chances.
And of course, tough-talking, hard-line Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, who's just as useless as all the other Home Secretaries. She's now, she's called the Terminator. She'll sort this out. If you don't leave the ECHR, Shabs, no chance whatsoever. And she won't leave the ECHR, so forget about it.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good morning, welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Tom Slater also with us, and we're joined right now by historian and military writer Elliot Wilson as we pass the last few moments ahead of the 2-minute silence on Armistice Day at 11 o'clock. Good morning to you, Elliot.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I was discussing with JK a little bit earlier about how just significant it is, and they all try to get, I don't know why, perhaps we're becoming more and more aware of how significant days like this are and these moments are where we do say thank you and remember the incredible sacrifices by men, you know, and women. But let's face it, largely, you know, young men whose lives were sacrificed for us to have the freedom to, you know, witter on air and give our opinions on social media and live the life that we lead. Do you worry that, as a historian, that actually a lot of young people today, they really have forgotten how high the price is to have this freedom?
I think there is a danger that we're becoming, or certainly younger generations are becoming more detached, and it's becoming more a kind of theoretical idea, because, you know, the First World War veterans are now all dead. There are relatively few Second World War veterans, and they're all extremely old now, because it's 80 years since the war ended, so you're well into your 90s. So I think it's becoming a kind of historical exercise more than it is something which there's a real connection to. And it's important that we remember not only the dead of both world wars, but of all the conflicts we've been in since, and that we do remember, as you say, the remarkable and exceptional service that the armed forces have given up to the point of the greatest sacrifice that can be demanded of people on behalf of their country.
Well, indeed, and it was always, I mean, very obvious, I think, to everyone, with the late Queen, when she attended these services as someone who had served, you know, on the home front and who had lost loved ones and was so aware of that sacrifice when she was attending these ceremonies representing the country. What did you make of Prince William, her grandson, the Prince of Wales? He's urged young people to wear a poppy for Remembrance Day in a video address back to students aged 9 to 14, telling them how important it is for all generations to commemorate the war dead.
I think the Prince of Wales makes a good point, and I think his argument that it's something that is ongoing, that it's not just an historical event, but that it's about who we are and how we project ourselves into the future is important. And I think he's right not to sort of wave a stick about this and to encourage rather than demand. Yes. I think when we demand that people do X or Y, it seems very much against the spirit of what we're, you know,
exactly.
I think he got the tone right, and I hope people will listen to him. And I think, you know, I think we are observing it fairly well these days, more so than I would say 20 or 30 years ago, probably. We observe not only Remembrance Sunday, but also Armistice Day now. And I think there is a keen awareness among a lot of people, certainly, of the sacrifices that the armed forces have made. The worry is that, of course, with the armed forces so small now, there are relatively few people who know people who've served or are served.
And our politicians routinely, whereas in politicians of previous generations will have served themselves, often conscripts who've been officers, and they had that personal experience. I mean, actually, we've had, you know, in my lifetime, you know, we've had Falklands and the Iraq War and Afghanistan War, but also, of course, we're watching right now war in Europe with Ukraine, and of course watching in what's been going on in Gaza as well. It's become perhaps a bit more real. Do you think that most people are aware of sometimes when that sacrifice is something that may be needed from the next generation down, because I'm very aware these days, you know, freedom of speech, many of the freedoms we have, our democracy, you know, these are very fragile things, and a lot of the polling seems to show again and again that it is younger people, younger generations, who don't value them. They don't value freedom of speech. They don't value the ability to vote and have democratic votes. They'd rather a strong man leader, and perhaps just don't understand the significance of, you know, be careful what you want.
Well, I think there's a fundamental point that, you know, defence of the realm is the fundamental duty of any government. I think any government which ignores that does so at its peril. And, you know, we do see people who sort of say, oh, yes, the armed forces is great, but we're not willing to spend more on defence. Well, if you spend money on defence, the spending on everything else potentially doesn't matter. I mean, I think Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, put it bluntly when he said earlier in the year, you know, you can have your healthcare and your benefits and all that kind of stuff, but you better start learning Russian. And, you know, he exaggerated, but he made a good point that defence is the cornerstone of everything else we do. And if we don't protect that, there's nothing else to protect.
And there is this idea, isn't there? Well, war is bad, and stopping wars, even with Donald Trump. You know, I'm the guy, you know, I'm the president for peace, not the president for war. But understanding that, you know, that sometimes war is necessary. You know, if you're Israel, to get your hostages back. Ukraine, to defend your nation state. For us to fight against the Nazis, not just to defend Britain, but to free Europe. I mean, sometimes war is the least worst thing you can do.
Absolutely. And, you know, if we just said that people should give their wallets to muggers in the streets, there would be no crime. But that's not... That's not a sustainable way of organising a society. And sometimes, and it should be the last resort, and any soldier will tell you this, you do have to say this far and no further. This time we have to be prepared to fight for what we are standing up for and what we believe in. And nobody wants to do that. I think this idea that, you know, Remembrance Sunday is about glorying war is absurd. Right. There have to be times when it's the only option for us to take, because unfortunately the world is not full of reasonable people like us.
Unfortunately, that's very true. Elliot Wilson, historian, military writer, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's 10:59 right now. Tom Slater's still with me. It's very noticeable to me when I interview military leaders, actually, how often they are the ones who are most opposed to any conflict, because they know the reality of it. They're not war, you know, armchair generals like myself.
No, exactly. War is hell, but sometimes it is necessary, as you say, which is precisely what we'll be marking in just a few moments' time. Yeah,
and we've got the ceremony, of course, at the Cenotaph on Whitehall, and obviously a very solemn ceremony, and we're going to be marking that in just a couple of moments as we approach the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, when people across the UK commemorate the end of the First World War, and of course all of the many, many fallen heroes in this country. I ask you now to please join us all in a 2-minute silence.
That was a 2-minute silence to mark the end of the First World War. It's 2 minutes past 11. Good morning. The outgoing Director General of the BBC has been holding an all-staff video meeting saying he's very proud of his staff and told them to keep calm heads and carry on as they would normally. The organisation could be sued by Donald Trump for editing a speech of his. The Shadow Culture Secretary, Nigel Huddleston, thinks the BBC should grovel to the President, otherwise the public will have to pay the bill.
It's taxpayers that would suffer because of the bad and poor decisions made by a bunch of left-wing journalists, anti-Trump journalists, and make it clear that they should be the ones held to account, and please don't penalise the rest of the British public.
The Prime Minister's given credence to the rumour that the government is going to stop capping child benefits to families with more than 2 children. The sickest arms said he wouldn't be telling reporters that the government's going to drive down child poverty if he wasn't clear that it will be taking a number of measures in order to do so. Former Conservative MP Nigel Evans told Talk that the policy will just mean more money needs to be found from elsewhere.
Lifting that cap is going to cost another $3.5 billion. And what is the announcement today? Unemployment's gone up from 4.8% to 5%. That's since this government came to power, we are now having to support another 180,000 people who are on the dole queue.
9 4-star generals have accused the Prime Minister of allowing human rights law to undermine the judgment of Britain's armed forces. In a letter to The Times, the former officers say every British soldier deployed must consider not only the enemy in front of them, but the lawyer behind them. Former Foreign Secretary William Hague says it's a serious matter.
For them to write so strongly, and so many of them all together, is a really serious thing. If the BBC wasn't in such a state this morning, this really ought to be the top matter in the country.
That's your latest on Talk.
Talk News Update. Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning and welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and this is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is always great to have your company. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Don't forget, you can always go to my YouTube page. If you miss anything on the show, Julia Hartley-Brewer Show is what we've called it, so you've got no excuse for not finding it. Hit subscribe. You never have to miss a thing. Coming up in this, we're going to return to Donald Trump threatening to sue the Beeb for $1 billion. That's our money though, guys, our money, unless he gets a full apology by Friday night over the Panorama documentary doctoring footage of his speech on January the 6th ahead of those riots. BBC boss Tim Davie is addressing corporation staff today as senior chiefs, including him and the other resignee, Deborah Turnus, seem to think the broadcaster is not institutionally biased and is just under attack by its political enemies. No, mate, it's under attack from within. You are eating yourselves alive and you just carry on doing it if you so choose. Also going to talk about the migrant Hokey Cokey as a second small boat migrant removed under Keir Starmer's flagship one-out exchange scheme with France led yet another to turn back to the UK. He arrived back on Sunday. He's going to be deported again. Of course, it's all a fantastic success for the Home Office because they were able to identify him and they can send him back. So it's all going really, really well. Some might say swimmingly well. And I don't know, maybe he'd save money if the guy swam instead of paid £1,500 for his dinghy. But there we are. Also going to be talking more about the upcoming budget. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, in a speech, she's done a speech a little bit earlier in the week, but also in an interview with the BBC yesterday, signalled that she will scrap the 2-child benefit cap. Also, she's preparing to raise billions of pounds with a manifesto-breaking raid on income tax at the upcoming budget. But she said, crucially, that no young person should be penalised for being born into a large family. But it's not the state penalising them, it's their own parents for having kids they can't afford and not all getting a job so they can pay for them. Not entirely sure why I should pay for someone who wants to have 5 kids and isn't prepared to do the amount of hours at work to pay for those 5 kids. But I'm old-fashioned like that. Plus, NHS leaders have... this is mind-blowing. They've claimed that St George's flags are creating no-go zones for NHS staff, not in hospitals, but in the street or in patients' homes when staff have to go to them. Some apparently are facing frequent abuse and feel intimidated by the presence of the national flag across the country. A poll of senior managers found 77% were concerned about discrimination towards NHS staff from patients and the public. But apparently it's absolutely fine to wear a Palestinian flag. I mean, that's absolutely fine, not a problem at all. And we all have to put up with the trans flag everywhere. That's not intimidating at all for women or gay women, for instance, who don't think that men can be women or men can be lesbians. That apparently we're all supposed to put up with. The world, as you know, has gone mad, which is why we are the home of common sense, trying to make some sense of it all for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of the topics we're talking about, but in particular, Donald Trump suing the Beeb for $1 billion. What do you make of that? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. That's the number to get in touch. You can text us on 87222. You can get in touch on X at talkTV. All together now. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate message. Tom Slater is here, editor of Spiked Online. Can we just start just by going back to Armistice Day and that 2-minute silence, although most of it was with that wonderful The Bugle. That does it for me every time. Absolute goosebumps. And knowing that I'm on air, not being able to sort of, I suppose, let emotion get you, but every time. Do you think that it's a real worry that a lot of people don't feel that?
There's certainly every year there's a discussion about if people in general or younger people in particular are sort of losing the sense of what remembrance means, what it's supposed to mark. But
also what they're willing to do themselves. Those polls that say that most young people wouldn't be prepared to fight for their country.
Exactly, and I think what things like Remembrance Day are supposed to do is to provide a sense of history in terms of what we owe to previous generations, not just with the First World War, but with conflict since, people laying down their lives for this country, but also to create that kind of sense of continuity with the present. There are values of courage, of self-sacrifice, of patriotism that one should want to aspire to. So it's probably not a surprise that more and more young people are left a little bit cold by things like Remembrance Day when you have a sense of all of those values being quite undermined.
Well, also, if you think about what people are taught at school, and I know a lot of schools do these events at school, but if you're told that your country is terrible and that your history of your country is awful and it's built on racism and slavery and exploitation, and the world hates us and should hate us, and we're responsible for every evil in the world, including the Industrial Revolution and climate change and all. Why would you think your country was worth dying for? No, I don't want anyone to die for their country. I don't want anyone to have to die for their country. But I'm more and more aware of the need that you need to have the level of military and the willingness and ability to use that military that will actually then put off any aggressors, to protect yourself and your allies, whether that's Ukraine, whether that's Israel, whether that's Taiwan, whether it's Latvia and Estonia in NATO, but also for ourselves, the willingness to say, no, we are willing and able to use force if necessary. We don't want to do it, but we will do it if we have to, and that there will be a unity and a coming together of the country. I like to think that in the event of that crisis, which I think will be in my lifetime, that we would come together.
And I think it's also partly about the times in which we live, not only because you've had
soft times.
Exactly, and in some ways that's something to be celebrated. The fact that there haven't had to be such serious conflicts or a genuine kind of threat to the territorial integrity of the UK that people were conscripted or having to do national service. That is a great thing that there's been a few generations now to whom that would be a very distant prospect. And I also think because of the fact that many of the wars that we have been engaged in recent years have, broadly speaking, kind of been wars of choice to one degree or another.
Not of survival.
Yeah, wars as a form of foreign policy. And therefore there has been this lack of appreciation of what happens when the chips are really down, what that really means, which is not some abstract concept of militarism. It's not some abstract debate about when force is and isn't necessary.
I want Putin to be running my country?
Exactly. Do you want your family, your community, your town, your city, your culture to be under the thumb of someone who shouldn't have it under their thumbs. That's a very different kettle of fish. And you saw that with a place like Ukraine, a place that was quite divided in many ways, that did have genuine concerns that would people fight. But as soon as someone rolls into your town with tanks, it's a very different kettle of fish to the kinds of discussions might one be having before something like that happens.
Absolutely. Well, isn't there that old saying, isn't it, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. This cycle. We are very much in you know, the times where life has been good, weaker men, and here we are, and we're going to be creating some very, very difficult times. Donald Trump creating a difficult time for the BBC, but let's face it, I mean, they sodden well deserve it, don't they? But we, as the long-suffering, forced by threat of fine and criminal penalties, sent to prison if you don't pay the fine, taxpayers from the licence fee, if he did sue the BBC for $1 billion, and I'm pretty sure he'd win, wouldn't win that sort of sum, but we'd end up paying it. So do we want him to be suing it, or do we quite like the fact that actually there is finally some accountability?
Well, I would rather not see £1 billion or anywhere near £1 billion in tax.
$1 billion, you know, since Brexit, that exchange rate's not so bad.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. So maybe it won't be so bad. But it's one of those things where I don't want to see public money being used to this end. I do think it will probably be resolved by probably a quite embarrassing apology. They have already apologised, but he probably...
He obviously wants a much more sort of full-throated...
Wants them to properly sort of take the knee, as it were, in a very different sense to what we've been used to. So I think that's probably where this will end up. I hope that's where this will end up. Certainly diplomatically, it would be a problem if you had him actually pursuing this more vigorously. Yeah. But it's a reminder, I mean, it probably did take having a kind of president in the White House that we have had to make so much of a stink about this that heads had to roll. But heads should have rolled anyway. The government should have been insistent that there was a clear out after this came to light. The internal mechanisms of the BBC should have been sufficiently strong, not quite subject to groupthink, that this didn't happen.
It didn't happen, and if it was found out, people would immediately take action. Well, look, bearing in mind, as I pointed out earlier, the man who is currently acting, you know, interim head of news, taken over from Deborah Turness, is a guy called Jonathan Monroe. And in May, when they had this internal meeting about this crisis over this documentary and the doctoring of this Donald Trump speech on January the 6th ahead of those riots in the Capitol, he said no attempt was made to mislead the audience. I mean, it's just laughable. Exactly, that's the only proper reaction. Yeah. It's laughable that they should have claimed that. So you've got a guy who stepped in after the woman's resigned, who says yesterday on the way into work that there is absolutely, you know, no institutional bias in the country, and you've got his boss still, Tim Davies, still in the job, arrived at work today, is going to address BBC staff, saying that, you know, all our staff are wonderful and he supports our staff. These people, as we were saying earlier, they're utterly delusional, but they're dangerous. They are the problem, not the solution.
And the thing is, deep down, I think a lot of people at the BBC will recognise there is a bit of a problem. Like people who
I don't think...
No, but what I mean is they must know that to a man and woman in that organisation, do they really think if you ask them who they're going to vote for at the next election, they would be anywhere close to representative of what the polls currently suggest? It is widely reported by former BBC insiders that the mood after the Brexit referendum was as if they were at a wake.
Oh no, I was in that. I love it, genuinely. I was in the BBC the day of that result. It was an absolute joy. They looked at me like I was Hitler. No, I'm not joking. I walked through. People were looking. They were broken souls, and they're looking as I walked through the newsroom. You can imagine the look on this face. I mean, one of the greatest days of my life. That result, and genuinely, they were looking at me like I was Adolf Hitler. Yeah. Because that's what they think Brexiteers are.
But Brexit could have been an opportunity for them to change tack. I remember there was this brief period for about 5 minutes where you'd hear discussions on BBC Radio saying we've got absolutely everything wrong and we need to reassess. I remember Question Time that week where for some reason Dimbleby was stood in the audience for a change rather than on the panel as if he had to show whose side he was on. It was very, very strange. But then they instantly did a 180 and it was all about they got this wrong, so we've got to move from informing them to indoctrinating them. We can't ever let this happen again.
Exactly.
And at that point, the die was cast. Something like this was going to happen. There was going to be a crisis point. The coverage got terrible, not just on populism, but on trans, on the climate. Everything got a lot worse since then because there was this panic about misinformation and whatnot.
Well, BBC Verify as well. I mean, the laughable BBC Verify. You know, where have they been all this sodding time?
That was my favourite part in the dossier, actually, was that they pointed out that the first big investigation that BBC Verify did on their own steam.
I'm going to stop drinking my tea because I know you're going to make me spit it out laughing.
Into claims that there was that areas with many ethnic minorities were paying more in car insurance, going to racist car insurance rates, basically. That piece had to be taken down because it was shown to be so woefully inadequate. The data was unusable and unsuitable. They couldn't prove causation. This was their first big investigation, and it had to be completely
because
taken down.
Because it wasn't verifiable.
Not clarified, not tweaked, not we've made a correction. Quite unusual, taken down, and that's BBC verified.
Yeah,
so that
I mean
tells you
they are an
everything you need to know.
absolute joke. I mean, and also didn't Marianne Spring didn't the woman who was the head of BBC Verified, did she not lie on her CV?
She's alleged to have lied on the CV.
I believe the woman who she handed the CV to was very clear that she had lied on her CV.
Yes, so she was certainly spreading misinformation about herself.
I mean, yeah, sacking offence instantly. You lied on your CV to get a job.
It's not great.
They find out 20 years later they can sack you for gross misconduct that moment. I'm sorry, it's utter madness, isn't it? Look, I mean, there's talk about the White House mulling a BBC reporter ban. You know, because the BBC staff in America are like, this is going to be a nightmare. I don't like presidents choosing who are coming in. I don't like it. Not acceptable to me. I don't like, I don't like reporters sitting there and allowing Donald Trump to castigate another reporter and not going. No, I give my question to him each time. That's what I mean. I don't like that. But we know it's all mad. We know they're not up to dealing with it. But Donald Trump, he's talking, criticising the BBC. But Keir Starmer. He's been remarkably quiet. I'm assuming we're going to hear from him. I mean, assuming he's here on Wednesday, we'll be doing PMQs on Wednesday. But he's ducked demands to ditch the licence fee. He's rallied behind the BBC. He says it's stronger than ever.
Yeah.
I mean, no, it's not. We've got Ed Davey and Keir Starmer as a body. But I think what's amazing is talking about the runners and riders who can replace the Director General of the BBC. And we've all been told, Tim Davey is a Tory. It's like, I mean, I talked on the show yesterday about my run-in with him in the summer, and I was I'm going to go with disappointed in him. Again, I don't want someone who represents my political views. I don't. That's not what the BBC should do.
Give it a job.
And the fact that you've got Kemi Badenoch, who does not just throw things out. She's a very considered thinker on a lot of things. And Nigel Farage and others being very critical of the BBC and its political allegiances. And you've got Labour largely defending it and the Lib Dems. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Completely. But the runners and riders, 8 people the Sky News have listed today who could replace Tim Davey. Charlotte Moore, she was at the BBC as Chief Content Officer for 5 years. No. James Harding, he's a former editor of The Times and a former director of BBC News and now owns News Venture Tortoise Media, who own the Observer newspaper. No. Jay Hunt, she's a former... She's Apple TV Plus's creative director for Europe. I mean, if you've seen Apple TV, got a question on that. But of course, she was director of programmes at, and chief creative officer at Channel 4. No. Alex Mann, she's done various different jobs, but she was. She's been a big figure, but she'd been involved in founding Channel 4. Dame Carolyn McCall, she's at ITV. Again, Dame Woke is her nickname. Trevor Phillips, I've got a lot of time for Trevor. He's at Sky News now, but again, I do worry he's gone a little bit Sky Woke native, having gone to Sky, having been someone who's been very brave in speaking out against a lot of woke madness on the left. But he's a staunch Labour guy, Labour through and through. And I just think, no, I think it needs to be someone who has not worked at any of these organisations, not for 1 minute.
It's a bit like when you need to do an inquiry and people are worried that someone has too much
grooming gags and you were a police officer. Yeah,
because in a way that's what needs to happen at the BBC. Is you need someone who's an outsider who isn't coming to it with any predisposition.
Yeah, and isn't mates, doesn't go to dinner parties with any of the people involved.
Yeah, exactly. And also because you want to I think this is part of the problem, is that when certainly the Conservatives were trying to push back against the wokeification of the BBC, when Robbie Gibb was appointed to the BBC board, this former Tory communications director who has since become the kind of panto villain of the pro-BBC lot. I mean, if he has been doing a right-wing coup, it's not been going particularly well.
He's been rubbish at it. He's as bad at that as Israel is at genocide.
But I think arguably it does also, even if he was being, excuse me, as careful as possible, it lends ammunition to the other side to say, oh, but actually there is bias at the BBC, it's in the other direction because of people like Robbie Gibb.
It's just...
You need an outsider, someone who just gets what the issues is, gets how important it is that impartiality is felt for maybe not everyone, but at least most people.
Do you know who I'd like? Andrew Neil.
Interesting.
But again, loads of people at the BBC would hate him.
No, exactly. Right of centre.
Yeah. Oh no, he says he's not. He says he's been
Murdoch man originally. Even that would be thrown at him. That's the problem.
Oh yeah, exactly. We talked a little bit earlier about Rachel Reeves and benefits and unemployment and the like. But there's another big story, obviously big brewing story. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, he's asking David Lammy today about the prison security crisis and all these messages accidentally released. And he's put out a letter yesterday. Look, I've written to you. I'm giving you 24 hours notice. Justice questions today. And after that appallingly poor performance at Prime Minister's questions, standing in for Never Hear Keir, David Lammy's, you've got advance notice. You should know how many people have been wrongly set free, and how whether they're still free, and whether they were serious criminals, violent or sex criminals. This is brewing, is it not? Alongside, of course, the immigration crisis, which is something that Robert Jenrick's talked about a lot as well. He's a former Home Office Minister, with the second migrant doing the old hokey cokey, getting coming here, getting deported to France, coming back here, then getting sent back to France. We're told he came back on Sunday and he's going to be deported. But I mean, it's not looking good.
It's not looking good. As you said, the one in, one out system, I didn't realise it was the same person who's coming in and coming out, but that's apparently what it's turned out to be.
And we're still I think under 100 people have been got rid of. Yeah. I mean, we get 1,000 a day sometimes.
It's just pointless. I mean, it was, but it's a proof of concept, as Keir Starmer likes to say. It's proof that the concept doesn't work. With David Lammy, I think these questions are going to be interesting, because if anyone's seen his performance on Celebrity Mastermind many years ago, he's not a details man.
This is why I've never done any of these shows.
I would probably
I've been asked to do 3 times. I've been asked to University Challenge 3 times, and I've always said it. No.
I would terrify myself. In fairness, I don't think I would do a David Lammy and say that red Leicester was a type of blue cheese.
Good.
Probably wouldn't go that far.
You might perhaps know that Henry VII did not inherit the throne from Henry VIII.
Exactly. So
you might know basics.
He might struggle with even these questions. But the thing is, prisoners being accidentally released has actually been going on for quite some time. It's shot up.
It doubled under Labour.
Exactly, so it is worth pointing that out. But I think the problem is, now that the media have realised it, you're just going to have a daily drip of these stories. It was like when the mainstream media certainly finally recognised that not everyone who's coming on those boats were asylum seekers looking for a better life. And then suddenly you've got this...
That's an outrageous thing to say. I'm reporting you to Ofcom.
And I'm sure they'll uphold it. But it's one of those things where this is going to be a constant headache for David Lammy now. And is he fleet-foot enough to
That said, and again, I try and be even-handed on these things, is that they are still dealing with a crisis. 14 years of Tory rule where they cut spending on criminal... You cannot do criminal justice on the cheap. A lot of us were saying that a long time ago. Austerity... But then what choice did they have? They had to cut something when we had austerity after the crash. I mean, each government can blame the last one. But again, none of that flies for voters anymore. We need you to do the job properly. Don't worry, they're going to put our taxes up to pay for it all. Just finally, I want to talk about the Olympic Committee. It emerged yesterday on the show, but didn't get a chance to talk about it. We're going to be talking to the brilliant, the wonderful Sharon Davies about this, a former Olympian herself. They're set to ban. I love the headlines. The headline I got given yesterday, the Telegraph, someone handed it to me, was that trans women are going to be banned from female sport. It's like, no, trans-identifying men, men are going to be banned from women's sport. If I look back 20 years, the idea that would be a headline in serious news, we're going to ban men from women's sport. Like, well, yeah, because they're men. Why was this allowed to happen in the first place? But this is all down to Donald Trump. He made it really clear. No, if you are trans-identified but you're actually not a woman, and we're not using female and male. I'm a woman. I own the word woman. I don't have to be called female. I'm not female. I don't know. Chicken or something. I'm trying to think of an animal. I'm just going to say dog, and I know what you're all going to say. No, but like, we use the word women, and then we allowed trans people to take that word from us. No, women. But it's because he basically said, no, if you're applying for a visa to come to the Olympics when it's in LA and you're competing in a women's sport but you're male, you ain't going to get your visa. Yeah. So he's kind of pushed this issue. And again, thank you very much, Donald Trump.
Yeah, sometimes it takes someone in a position of government to actually govern, to actually throw the weight around a little bit for these things to go, because I really don't think that there's people who are working in the whole kind of structure of the IOC and the Olympics. I'm sure a lot of them either couldn't care either way, haven't thought about this that much, or are implacably against it. But as is often the case, they are just in hock to the most shrill activists amongst them. Yep. They're terrified of media scrutiny, and I think when given an out to say we have to do this, they willingly took it. Yeah. But it's tremendously significant. it's a vindication and a long-running reward for the people who've been campaigning so hard on this.
The Martina Navratilova and Sharon Davies and others. Also, it will be really nice at the Olympics. We're not going to have 1 billion people able to watch a man punch a woman in the face and pretend that it's a sport.
And pretend that that's a progressive development.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that was, I think, the key moment that we're like, yeah, maybe this isn't acceptable.
But it's also how depressing how long it takes to bring us back to just normality and common sense.
Yeah.
It's not like we've even pushed forward, it's that we've just brought
No,
it
we've
back
just
to where it
gone,
should
we're
be.
going to go back to sanity, exactly. Anyway, we'll talk to Sharon Davies later in the show. Up next, can take your calls, 0344 499 1000. Not a surprise, they're all on the BBC, Donald Trump and what the hell is going on at the BBC. Nothing at all, nothing to see here. Everything's absolutely fine. Tim Davey reckons everyone's wonderful, he supports them all, no institutional bias. I don't even know why the man resigned at this point. Anyway, I'll talk to you in just a few moments. And in a few moments, also going to talk to Robin Aitken, a former BBCer, to explain why he thinks things are going wrong at the BBC. This is Talk.
The BBC is straight down the line. There's room on the right for people like you, for people GB News, for Farage. So,
there's room for people like me, Farage and GB News on the right. You're doing it again. The BBC... Well, how would you describe the BBC?
Straight down the line, too straight down the line.
You've got to be winding me up. Have you taken something overnight, man? What's wrong with you? What?
The BBC is institutionally fair.
It's institutionally biased.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Morning, welcome back. 11:31 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get straight to your calls. Herbie's on the line in Harrow. Morning, Chair Herbie. What do you want to say about the BBC?
Too much.
Keep it clean. Don't get me in trouble, mate.
Well, welcome to the season of goodwill and happiness to all men, and repeats for God knows how many times. Oh, for God's sake, what do we pay money for repeats? We don't get entertained anymore, Juliet, by BBC. You know, they put on sports. You know, you've got the BBC one, which you've got all your normal programmes. They take everything off of there for football, cricket. Not everybody likes sport. Why? With all the other channels they got, why do they take the main channel away for your entertainment? Please tell me that. Explain me that.
Well, I mean, I've got to be honest, I barely watch the BBC anymore. I mean, there are a couple of programmes that I quite enjoy, but I could just default and not see any BBC for 3 weeks at a time, and it just, you know, I know I'm not missing anything.
You're all right. Totally right, because it'd be repeated the next day. You know, and this is what we're paying huge sums of money. Okay, the licence fee is not so bad if you think, because you need to be very careful if you want to go to subscription, because the subscription may become more than the licence fee. Yeah. So you could be paying that more. So
yeah, but would people? But it would be a choice. Look, I mean, I know an awful lot of people who've got a lot of different subscriptions. I think personally Netflix is the one worth paying for. We've got all the sports stuff because I'm married to a bloke. But generally, I mean, you know, people at least would be making a choice and they wouldn't be forced by law to pay for it.
Well, yeah, I know you get repeats on Sky and on Netflix and everything else as well. The one thing I must say, when the BBC do good programmes, they really do good programmes. It's quality. But we seem to have lost all that. It's the repeats that get me. I'm sure they'll be watching Home Alone again this Christmas for about the 50th time. Yeah. You know, as always. And
it's different from when I was younger, when, you know, you'd see the James Bond film that came out 5 years earlier, and it was the first chance to see it. On terrestrial, on telly. It wasn't on VCR, it wasn't anything. And you'd get a chance, and the whole family would sit and watch the James Bond film, you know. But now, you know, if you want to see something, you can just, you know, you can download it yourself and you can see it anytime you want. I think you're right. Again, a lot of people just won't think it's value for money anymore. Herbie, thank you for that. Charlie's in East Sussex. Hi, Charlie. What do you want to say?
Oh, hi, Julia. I'm just getting a little bit tired of hearing... the BBC have made a mistake. Everybody's saying mistake. Yes. The media's saying mistake. It really isn't a mistake, is it? A mistake is me calling you Julie instead of Julia, or you calling me Chris. Yeah. And that's a mistake. That's a genuine mistake.
Quite right, Chris.
These are thanks, Julie. And it's, you know, it's very, very blatant.
Yeah. And deliberate. It's a deliberate, and it was politically motivated.
Absolutely. And I'm just getting wound up. There are people even coming on to talk saying, oh, it's a mistake, it's a mistake. Everyone's out there saying it's a mistake, we've made a mistake. It really isn't a mistake. You know, a mistake is, you know, going down a one-way road the wrong way. That's a mistake. You know, so let's just clear this up once and for all. It's not a mistake.
It was a deliberate act. It was a politically motivated, very deliberate act of basically of sabotage. Donald Trump is quite right to sue the backsides off them. The only trouble is if he did win and it did go ahead, we would be the ones ending up paying for it. But there we are. Rather less money for political. I don't know. Less money to pay drag queens to do shows on the Beeb. There we are. Charlie, stroke Chris, thank you very much indeed. We'll take a quick break. 11:35 up next. Going to talk to Robin Aitken. He's a former BBC journalist, but you want to hear from him. He's written a book called Can We Trust the BBC? I can tell you the answer is absolutely no. That's up next. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Morning, welcome back. 11:38 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's introduce you to my next guest, Robin Aitken. He's a former BBC journalist. Don't boo, don't boo. He's also the author of Can We Trust the BBC? Robin Aitken, MBE, I should add. Robin, answer that question. Can we trust the BBC?
Do you know, Julia, I wrote that book nearly 20 years ago. I've written another couple since then about the BBC. And you know, the clue's in the title of the book a bit, isn't it, really? No one writes a book like that with the answer, yes, of course you can trust
They're
the
brilliant.
BBC.
Everything's fine. Well, I mean, the Director-General of the BBC thinks everything's fine. So does the outgoing head of news. Everyone's brilliant. Everyone's fabulous. And give them all a round of applause.
I know, but, you know, it is fatuous to hear these people still proclaiming that BBC is pure as the driven snow, that all BBC journalists are paragons of impartiality. It simply isn't true. And, you know, they've been caught red-handed. This dossier of Prescott's shows quite clearly what was going on, you know, but, you know, actually we didn't need Prescott, did we, Julia, to know these things? I mean, people like you and I who take an interest in these matters have noticed... Yeah. Well, it didn't take a genius to notice that the BBC was anti-Trump.
I've got eyes and ears. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, they were.
So wait a minute. Are you saying this isn't just some big, you know, right-wing conspiracy by enemies of the BBC?
The idea that there's a right-wing conspiracy in the BBC, this idea that there's some sort of coup going on, is utter nonsense. I mean, what has happened clearly on the board is there has been a division of opinion on the board, and there have been people within the BBC who have stoutly resisted the idea of coming out and apologising for what's happened. I mean, one of the things that strikes me about this whole mess the BBC is now in is that the Director General and the Director of News knew about all this stuff back in May.
Yeah.
Now, if you ask yourself this, suppose at that moment when they first discovered the extent of the problem with BBC Arabic and the Trump thing and all the rest of it, if at that moment they had said, right, well, actually, let's come clean on this. Let's actually make this public. Let's let some heads roll, and maybe big heads roll. The BBC now would be in a much, much better place.
Well, of course they would. But you say when they found out, they didn't find out anything in May. They just saw the report by Michael Prescott in May. This stuff he was deciding stuff that was already known. You know, we already knew that they were having to correct 2 reports a week on their coverage of Gaza. But what's extraordinary, Jonathan Monroe, and I keep on to say because I just find this mind-blowing, he's the interim head of news, taking over from Deborah Turnez. But I was at that meeting in May when all of this was discussed, and he said at the time of the Donald Trump documentary and the doctoring of his and splicing of his speech, no attempt was made to mislead the audience. I mean, that's laughable.
Yeah, what planet is this guy on? I mean, you have to wonder actually whether Munro's position is at all secure in the light of all this. I wouldn't be surprised if pressure mounted on him to go, because that quote you gave there is pretty damning. I mean, I could tell you a story about a panorama which went out in 2003, which was a look at Pope John Paul II's record. There was an interviewee in that who was a mate of John Paul's from his days in Poland. He's a theologian. He was badly edited. I mean, he felt that he had been seriously misrepresented in the panorama that appeared. He said afterwards, this is the kind of thing that used to happen in under communism in the Eastern Bloc. He said, we're well used to that. And he said, I think that people who take part in BBC programmes should be warned about what's going to happen to them. And that was 20 years ago. And that is actually in the first book that I wrote. You know, none of this stuff is new. And look, I'm not somebody who wishes to tear down the portals of Broadcasting House. I don't think that we should rush into destroying the BBC.
I agree with you, yeah.
Yeah, because I think it still does good stuff, and I think that what is needed is reform, and I have a plan for reform.
Well, I mean, if only they did. But you can't reform something if you don't actually think there's a problem. And it is very clear from the resignation letters, the letter from Samir Shah, the chairman, who seems to be a remarkably unimpressive figure, if you ask me, and the self-justification, the praise for the stuff, all of that stuff. They absolutely don't get it. They don't think there's a problem. They think the problem is an internal conspiracy, an external conspiracy. They think the problem is the whistleblower. I mean, they don't get it.
No, absolutely. And, you know, talk to any priest who, you know, suppose you go to confession. Yep. As it happens, I do go to confession.
No priest would have time to deal with me.
If you go to confession, you know, the thing is, the first thing you do is you examine your conscience. There can be no absolution. There can be no absolution without repentance. And repentance means recognizing your sin.
Acknowledge.
And the BBC, you know, this is the whole point. The BBC resolutely refuses to accept that there is a problem with bias until that very... And look, I understand why that is so difficult, because if the BBC comes out, suppose it came out today and said, well, actually, you're right, you know, there has been bias at the BBC, there is bias at the BBC, well, then the whole facade of impartiality, the world's greatest broadcaster, you can trust us, we're honest and truthful, all that comes crashing down. But the point is, Julia, until that admission is made, there can be no proper reform at the BBC.
And that's the key thing. Look, I've just been given some of the words that the outgoing Director General, Tim Davie, has said in a 40-minute Zoom call with staff. Because obviously got staff around the country on different shifts, but he said in his speech to them, he admitted the BBC had made, quote, some mistakes that have cost us. Do you think? Possibly $1 billion of Donald Trump. He says, I think we've got to fight for our journalism. Again, I'm not sure our journalism. Maybe you could fight for just proper journalism. He says, I'm fiercely proud of this organisation. Again, I don't know why he is. And he said BBC journalists were doing a fantastic job. Well, blatantly, they are not all doing that. He said 3 reasons were behind his resignation, which did apparently come as a shock to the board. They hadn't expected him to resign. The relentlessness of the role. He's been in the job since since autumn of 2021, and it's been 2020. Sorry, it's been non-stop in those 5 years. He says the upcoming charter renewal, because that's big negotiation. We know that's going to be starting as of December. The Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy is starting that, but also pressure. He says following criticism of the Panorama documentary on Trump. He said we did make a mistake regarding the editing of that speech, and he said the BBC was in a really good position, had a very strong case on the charter renewal, and he said the government of the day are supportive of public institutions and insisted the BBC would survive his departure. Now, my guess is both the government and the BBC are going to want that charter sewn up very, very quickly so that it isn't, say, for instance, Prime Minister Nigel Farage in charge. But there's lots of people saying yesterday, they're going to try and delay it. No, they're not. They're going to try and get it done as soon as possible, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. No, I think you're bang on there. I mean, the old story about, the fish say, what's water? Because they're surrounded by it. The problem is that people in the BBC, I think, genuinely believe very often that they are in some way without a political viewpoint themselves, because they're surrounded by people, by and large, who all think the same. There's this massive groupthink going on. So it's very difficult under those circumstances to actually recognise your own bias, to recognise, as I say, to admit your own journalistic sins. I mean, when I was in the BBC, I was actually very aware of the bias, because my views were diametrically opposed to those of many of my colleagues at the time. I was lucky enough to work for a good journalist, Rod Liddell, as editor of the Today programme. Now, Rod was somebody, bless his heart, who was a proper journalist he had strong views of his own, don't get me wrong, but he was prepared to, and wanted, actually, to stir up controversy and having lots of disparate, of real diversity of opinion.
Because that's proper. And that's the thing, and people wouldn't be afraid of that. And as you say, it's really interesting. I think I was just going to ask you about that, because Tom Slater and I have been discussing all morning. why they don't think there's a problem is because, like on Brexit, things like that, they didn't know anyone who thought differently from them. They don't know anyone who doesn't think that open borders is a jolly good thing. They don't know anyone who doesn't think that promotion of trans rights over women's and girls' rights isn't the progressive and right thing to do, and that Black Lives Matter and you should take the knee. They live in a bubble where that is the norm. And therefore, that anyone who doesn't think there is a kind of a sort of noblesse oblige thing. So it's kind of a haughty, we know better than the masses view, isn't there?
Absolutely, yes. And I heard Chris Patton, ex-chairman of the BBC, talking yesterday about how marvellous the BBC, talking with a kind of lordly disdain for the views of most of the country. Brexit, which you just mentioned there. Brexit, it was so obvious throughout the long years of the Brexit debate which side the BBC was on. Yeah. It was so fiercely opposed to Brexit and so desperately pro-European that you'd have to be blind and deaf not to have picked that up from BBC coverage. And yet it goes on proclaiming itself to be impartial. That was, the biggest question in British politics for a decade and more. And yet the BBC was so firmly on the pro-European side. Yeah. It was a huge lapse of journalistic integrity at the BBC, and it was across, these things are not mistakes, as the caller a couple of back said. These things are not mistakes. What these demonstrate is a deep-seated, consistent, well worked out political viewpoint which amounts to a massive bias. That is the truth.
Absolutely. I couldn't say fairer than that. Robin Aitken, former BBC journalist, author of Can We Trust the BBC, numerous other books on the BBC. Tom Slater, your response to what he had to say?
Well, I think it's just a reminder that this isn't an issue that has cropped up just in the past few years. That being said, maybe when Robin was working at the BBC, there was a kind of sense in which there was a soft metropolitan liberal bias. I think what has changed is that that's gone from being a much firmer bias, and also that we've gone from being a bit blinkered to just outright propaganda and indoctrination, which is something new. So maybe a kind of earlier iteration of this was something that was more, you could put up with it a little bit more, but it's been a different game in the past.
Do you remember David Attenborough documentaries when you didn't get the lecture as part of the information about the frogs? 11:50 is the time. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to talk about the NHS staff who were intimidated and very unhappy about having to see their own national flag. We'll talk to Amy Gallagher about that. This is Talk.
What the normal people in this country really believe about the BBC? Well, you've only got to look at the viewing figures to find out exactly what most people do think about them. And this includes the BBC News as well, which used to be the jewel in the crown.
Yeah.
Now, so few people are watching the BBC. If you look at the 16 to 24-year-olds, only 5% of them are watching mainstream media, which includes the BBC, at all.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Morning, welcome back to the show. 11:54 is the time. Let's talk about St George's flag. Apparently it upsets people. National England flag, apparently terribly upsetting. And according to NHS managers, they create no-go zones for staff at the NHS. What, I hear you cry? Well, let's try and find out what earth this is about with Amy Gallagher. She's a former NHS nurse, of course. You'll know her as a friend of the show, as a commentator at the New Culture Forum. Amy, good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
What the hell's going on?
Yeah, this is amazing. So staff at the NHS are apparently offended by patients having the England flag, the national flag, which isn't offensive at all, outside their homes. And they don't want
disgusting.
Yeah, they don't want to visit patients who have this flag outside their home. Now, when I trained as a nurse, I was taught that you are supposed to have an attitude of being non-judgmental, neutral, tolerant, accepting of the patients you are treating, okay? And whether that patient has a political view you don't like, whether they dress in a way you don't like, whether they behave in a way you don't like, you're supposed to just treat them.
It's irrelevant.
It's totally and utterly irrelevant. The idea that staff are now saying, I don't want to visit patients who have something in their home that I don't like, which is not offensive at all, but they just don't like it. You have to now ask ourselves, what is the point of the NHS at this point? Is it for staff to feel good and not be offended, or is it to treat patients?
What if someone has I mean, I'm an atheist. Would I be offended by someone having a picture of Jesus on the cross, or something like that? I mean, no. Would a prayer mat? No, wouldn't bother me. It's irrelevant. But what's really interesting is that there are particular difficulties for staff working in the community, but particularly what they're talking about is they say our staff, who are a large minority of black and Asian staff, are feeling deliberately intimidated when the flags were going up. They were creating what they felt were no-go zones. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not a flag just for white English people. I know plenty of black and Asian people who are very proud of both the Union flag and the cross of St George. And it's weirdly, it's a weird left-wing so-called progressive thing to turn those flags into somehow, let's face it, into sort of somehow bigoted, racist, divisive images.
It's actually, I would say it's almost a racist assumption to assume that flag is just for white people, because there are a lot of families, mixed race families, black families, that love showing that flag. And it's a bit rich, I would say, for NH staff to be moaning about flags when for the last 5 years, the Progress Pride flag, the transgender flag, has been on lanyards, it's been on NHS notice boards. I worked in a hospital where that flag was flown, a huge Progress Pride flag was flown right outside. Now, I find that offensive. To me, that flag represents misogyny and homophobia. But I was expecting to put up with it, So the idea...
And also, NHS staff routinely wearing their pro-Palestinian flag when Jewish patients are coming in. And genuinely, we've had people genuinely worried for their own safety because some of the online videos from some pro-Palestinian staff have frankly basically threatened the lives of Jewish people.
Yeah, I mean, this just shows you that, like the BBC, the NHS, which is supposed to be impartial and neutral, just absolutely is not and hasn't been for a long time. And to me, it's just getting worse, actually.
Absolutely. And again, this is a flag should be for everyone. There's no doubt at all. Some of the people who were doing the, the raise the colours thing, actually, I can be, can be perhaps a little bit intimidating for some people, some of the views of some of those people. There's a broad spectrum of views, but no one, whether you're, leading Labour MP, or anyone else, should be bothered by seeing the national flag. There's no other country where that is a thing. We are unique in the world where huge numbers of people, but particularly huge numbers of people who are in charge of us, are embarrassed and ashamed of our flags.
Yes, exactly. No, I totally agree. And it should be, I think that flag should be flown outside hospitals more often.
Yeah.
Why do we have Black Lives Matter and Progress Pride flags being flown at hospitals?
God, never. I mean, I certainly have the view, and I'm with Reform on this one, public buildings, under no circumstances should any of these clearly divisive flags, they've got no place here. And again, I agree with you completely on the so-called pride flag. Again, gay people have had equal rights in this country for a very, very long time. I think can we all move on now and just sort of, it's not interesting, it's not that it's not that bothered. Thank you very much. But also in the so-called even the progressive pride flag, which includes trans, as you say, it's homophobic and misogynistic.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I just think that the staff need to just get over it. As I said, you're supposed to just put your views to the side. And if a patient says or does something that you don't like, you're supposed to, just put up with it. I mean, unless you're actually really being overtly bullied by
Yes, if you're being abused, absolutely.
But
Gallagher, always a voice of sense and reason. Thank you very much. Tom Sleater. I mean, can everyone just relax about the flag, for the love of God?
I know, and the thing is, you talk yourself into it being a divisive thing.
Yeah.
Whereas it should, of course, be a unifying
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, it was the left's shame of our culture and our history that led to that being a flag that people wanted to reclaim, and then they go, oh, well, there you are, it's the racist over there. Nothing racist about our national flags, either of the English or the Union one. Anyway, we're going to go up to the top of the hour. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
afternoon. Welcome back to the show. It's 2 minutes past 12. This is Talk the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Whether you're listening on DAB Plus Radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or you're connected to us, fabulous to have your company. Also, the wonderful company of editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Thank you for staying with us.
Afternoon.
You know, I lock the door. I don't let him out. That's reasonable. And whether you miss anything of the show or not, do go to my YouTube page, the Julia Hartley-Brewer Show. If you hit subscribe, you never have to miss a thing. And also, if you just all subscribe, then they'll let me stop saying it. I mean, it's in all of our interests, guys. All of our interests. Anyway, coming up in this hour, more on Donald Trump suing the BBC for $1 billion. BBC boss Tim Davie basically in a statement to an address to his BBC staff, clearly showing he doesn't get it at all. Everything's fine. Everyone at the BBC is absolutely wonderful. He's fiercely proud of the organisation. But he did admit, yeah, there was a mistake over that doctored, spliced speech by Donald Trump back ahead of the January 6th riots. I mean, yeah, do you think? Anyway, also going to be talking about the second small boat migrant who was removed under Keir Starmer's flagship one-in, one-out exchange programme with France, has now crossed back to the UK. It turns out the illegal migrant arrived back on Sunday, and it's amazing, you know, people want to come here. What can we say? But he is going to be deported again, and apparently this is all a great success because they were able to identify him. It's all going well. It's all going well. As I pointed out earlier, it's going swimmingly well. And he could have saved himself 2 crossings if he'd swum instead of paying for the dinghies. The International Olympic Committee also is moving towards some sanity at long last with a blanket ban on what we're told are trans women, but they're actually trans-identifying men from women's sport. This could be introduced in time for the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics, because basically Donald Trump says, yeah, if you're a man competing in women's sport, you're not going to be let in anyway because we're in charge of visas. So they kind of had their hand forced there. But banning men from women's sport should not be a headline read out from anybody other than a satirical new, comedy show. And yet this is the madness we're in. Plus, we're also going to talk about the UK's Prevent Counter-Terrorism strategy that doesn't do much preventing. It's no longer keeping the country safe. It needs a radical overhaul. Who said that? Well, an independent commission saying that 90% of people referred to the scheme are turned away because they've got no obvious ideology, even though they often, Axel Rudikabana, anyone, go on to commit terrible, violent crimes. We'll talk about all of that, plenty more besides. Tom Slater's still with me. I do want to go back over with you some of the things that Tim Davie, the outgoing Director General of the BBC, has said. I mean, he's still there. He's been basically doing a sort of a talk at the BBC, 40-minute long, a call with staff. He's talked about how the BBC must fight for its journalism. I mean, I don't think they should be fighting for the BBC's journalism. They should be fighting for proper journalism. Following, he says, a tough few days. He admitted the BBC had made mistakes that have cost us. He says, I'm fiercely proud of this organisation. He kept saying to the staff, he said, BBC journalists were doing a fantastic job. He said the 3 key reasons he was leaving was partly the criticism of the Panorama documentary on Trump, but also the relentlessness of the role and the upcoming charter renewal negotiations. He said the BBC was in a really good position and had a very strong case. I mean, the man is completely, absolutely off the reservation on this. But he also said the government of the day is supportive of public institutions like the BBC, and says the BBC will survive. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's the bunker mentality, isn't it, that's set in with some of them, which is that they've been caught out. They have been demonstrably shown to have been engaged in systemic bias. And of course you're going to stick up for yourself to a degree. Of course you're going to stick up for your staff to a degree. But you have to admit that there is a problem there. I mean, Tim Davie, when he was first brought in, because he does nominally have a kind of conservative background, was being kind of talked up as someone who was going to launch a war on woke in the corporation. Yeah. He was actually a kind of seen as a kind of slightly sinister figure by the very people who are now saying it's a terrible thing that he stepped down. So surely he must know, or at least be aware, that there is concerns on the right, on the centre-right and other parts of politics as well, that the BBC is just the propaganda arm of the liberal left. And to pretend like those issues have just gone away is absolutely nonsensical. I think it's obvious that the issues run so much deeper than a few mistakes. That memo makes that absolutely clear. This is not just one bad edit, as people are trying to make out. There is a catalogue of failures in there. But again, I think it's one of those things where by dint of trying to protect your own reputation or to cover up for the fact that basically you're time presiding over the BBC has been defined by one scandal over another. You're going to try and gloss over it, aren't you?
It's been an absolute disaster. I haven't even mentioned Hugh Edwards.
No, exactly.
I mean, seriously.
Hugh Edwards, the Bob Villain thing. There's one thing after another.
You literally
really,
go through again and again and again, and it's just non-stop, isn't it? And again, we've got a report today in the Telegraph about a journalist who's gender critical, i.e. understands basic biological fact, and wanted to put stories through, and basically having other journalists sort of basically passing her notes saying, "Don't tell anyone else, but I agree with you." That's not a normal organisation. I'm really sorry. By the way, got some breaking news before we go to our next guest. Asylum seekers will continue to be housed in the Bell Hotel in Essex. This after Epping Forest District Council failed to secure a High Court injunction that would block them from living there. Of course, after all those protests, and this, of course, remember, we've all now that the Ethiopian. I've lost her baby. Was it Beid? No, not Beid. I've lost track. There have been so many.
Hadish Kabati.
That's it, because he has actually now been deported, hasn't he? Got paid an extra 500 quid after
he'll be coming back in on the one in, one out.
Oh,
any day
absolutely.
Now,
we'll see you again soon, mate. I'm convinced that these migrant people smugglers, that they are now offering a free return. If you get deported, second trip for free or on a discount, I swear to you. But anyway, we'll talk about that coming up as well with my next guest, Baroness Kate Hoey. She's an independent peer and also a former Labour minister, indeed, former Labour culture minister. Very, very good afternoon to you, Kate.
Good afternoon, Julia.
I mean, where do we start, love? BBC. I mean, look, you know the story. Everyone knows the story. I'm not going to bore everyone repeating it all again. Donald Trump suing, and then we've got Tim Davie basically saying everything's fine.
Well, I think this is only the tip of the iceberg, really. Removing two people isn't nearly enough. I mean, there's the deputy news guy, I've forgotten his name, Jonathan
Monroe.
I mean, he is someone who's actually done some pretty awful things over the last year or so. He hasn't gone. And I just wonder what's happened to the actual producer or the person who did this mistake. A mistake when you actually edit something in such a way as to change completely what Trump said. And I mean, whatever you think of Trump, I mean, no one wants to be completely, mistaken, the words being completely changed. So I think what's worse for me was reading the Samir Shah letter to
the chairman of the BBC.
The chairman of the BBC.
It was absolutely extraordinary letter.
Pathetic. It was pathetic, Julia. I mean, they clearly have not recognised that trust has gone. And when trust is gone, there is a problem. And the only way you change a problem is to, first of all, accept there is a big problem. Yeah. And no one seems to do that.
No, none of them seem to do that, whether it was Deborah Turness walking into the BBC yesterday, what Tim Davies had to say, there's no institutional bias, not a mistake. And again, one of our callers pointed out, and I couldn't agree with them more, they keep saying it's a mistake. You don't mistakenly splice together two bits of a speech 54 minutes apart to completely distort what someone has said. You just don't do it. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate political move.
If they've admitted that this happened this time, how many other times has this happened? Are we all going to feel that every time you go on? I mean, I've stopped doing, I only tend to do live things because actually if you're not live on the BBC, over the years, I realised, in radio as well, that they could snip out the bits that they wanted to put into they would put it into their context. So they would do an interview with you and then they would use the bits that most help them in trying to present something. Now, I mean, maybe all media do that, but certainly I noticed it with the BBC. So I think I'm concerned about this government look over. They're going to consult over the licence fee because I'm sure it'll end up as some kind of halfway house. Personally, I feel if you don't want to watch the BBC, you should not have to pay a licence fee in order to be able to watch other channels.
That's fair enough,
a basic principle.
By the way, on the point you mentioned about, not going on unless it's live, and I know lots of politicians do that. I mean, Tony Benn, famously, he would always get his little own dictaphone and he would record every interview and say, no, I've got a record of it too, so you can't You can't distort what I've had to say. I mean, again, you know, you learn, you know, you live by the sword, you die by the sword on that front. But it is extraordinary, isn't it, that they don't get it. I mean, again, it's not just the Trump thing. You know, that Michael Prescott report went over loads of issues over loads of years. We've just spoken to Robert Aitken. He's talked about the BBC and problems there for 20 years. What do you think the issue is? Because there is undoubtedly, I don't know what Ed Miliband's on at all, but I don't know what Ed Davies on, the Lib Dem leader, thinking all this. They're in hock to Nigel Farage. I mean, that's just completely deluded. But there is no doubt there is a left liberal, so-called progressive, it's not progressive viewpoint. Why do they not see that they have that view? Why do they not get it?
Well, I think, you know, this word culture we use, but there is a sort of culture in the BBC that they do, everything they do is the right way to do things and the right view on something. And if you don't hold that view, I mean, just look at how that poor BBC presenter, Martine
Vauxhall,
treated. I mean, that was absolutely outrageous. And that was happening the week that all of this, the rest of this thing was happening, that she was actually told off because she would refuse to use pregnant people and then added women.
And she dared to roll her eyes, which was the appropriate response.
Yeah, I mean that is outrageous. And then the other thing that's come, it's clear that they knew that all of this had happened. I mean, the Trump thing is important because obviously, you know, he could go to court, although I imagine that will all get settled in some way. But that's only one of the many, many areas. And for those of us over the years who've sort of tried to say things, and I've been always, you know, retweeting defund the BBC thing, because they've done a lot of really good work on how the BBC has behaved. It's really good that something has come out now, and the Prescott report came out.
Yeah, but I worry that what's going to happen again, they lose, you know, a couple of senior heads roll, and then they just carry on as normal because they really do not think there's a problem. Who would you want as a new Director General of the BBC? Because a lot of people thought that Tim Davie, coming from a corporate background, again, he was a PR man for Pepsi. I mean, you know, give me a break. He also used to work at the BBC beforehand, but he was seen as he was right wing, so he'd come in with a fresh broom. But the reality is, there are 8 runners and riders, and pretty much all of them, to a man and a woman, are as woke can be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I saw him come in and do his interview this morning, tireless and looking just the absolute epitome of a sort of liberal progressive coming into work at 9:30 or whatever it was. Anyway, I think I don't see why it needs to take 5 months or 6 months to get somebody in there. I mean, you know, there could be somebody like perhaps Trevor Phillips, who's shown his independence. I mean, there's Andrew Neil. There's yourself, Julia. I mean,
I'd happily do the job, but I tell you what, there'd be a lot of people out of work at the end of my first shift.
You would love it, but I mean, what we need is first of all a recognition that there has been a problem, because if they don't recognise that and they're not prepared to see that means real change and real axing of probably a number of people who've shown their bias and their behaviour over the last number of years.
Then they're going to have to go. Let me also ask you about this breaking news we've had in the last 10 minutes, that asylum seekers can continue to be housed at the Bell Hotel in Essex. This after Epping Forest District Council failed to secure a High Court injunction that would block them from living there. We have this bizarre situation, haven't we, where we've had, this is of course the hotel where Hadush Kabati was accused and convicted and now deported at long last of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl, and, you know, wrongly released, now deported. I mean, he'll probably be back again on the next dingy round next week, no doubt. But we're in this absurd situation where we had the Home Office fighting to keep asylum seekers in the hotel against the wishes of the council and the local people, at the same time as having an official policy to get asylum seekers out of these hotels. But what do you make of this court judgment?
Well, I think it's a real insult to the people of that area who have had particular problems. I mean, there's been problems at many of the hotels housing asylum seekers and migrants, but this has been such a focus of attention because of the serious nature of, the behaviour of one or two of the people who've been in there. But, you know, the judge has said this, and presumably the government will be delighted, because it looks like they've won in a case that they did not accept, that the protests were genuine. They kept implying that it was people from the far right who'd come in to protest. And it was just, on the whole, ordinary people who just felt concerned.
Local mums.
And worried. But those mums will still be worried now. And it also showed, the government could have used this hotel as an opportunity to say, to show that they really meant they were going to get people out of hotels and placed elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm in bind on this one because I'm not sure I want people out of hotels. They want them out of hotels. They reckon to save money. It's $145 a night on average instead of £35 a night, depending on the accommodation they get. Or if they're just going to put them into, bed sits, they're going to be hidden in the community. I think that's more dangerous.
I think the worry there is that it's going to cause real anger of people who are on the housing waiting list and have been for a very long time and see their local council suddenly giving up 100, 200 places to people who have not been in the country very long. And when we look at the fact that since the one in, one out was started, 13,000, I think over 13,000 migrants had come in. There were 500 the other day came in, and yet there's something like a dozen, if even that, have been sent away and they've come back. So it's not going to solve the real crisis. And I think that, if the government was serious about protecting their borders, they would be having the Royal Navy or some elements of the military involved in stopping the crossings.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've also got the hokey cokey of yet another migrant who's come here, been detained, deported back to France, given, a few £1,000 as a result, and then we pay for their flight and everything. And now they've come back again, apparently on Sunday, and now they're going to be deported again. And the government laughably says, well, it shows the system is working because we're able to identify this person.
I genuinely could not understand how any logic could say it. They didn't explain the logic, but I couldn't understand the logic. And of course, what was interesting is that what they're supposedly saying is that the migrants are saying when they go sent back, France is not refusing to give them any kind of accommodation, any kind of help or support, and they're going to be back staying in camps again, which just shows what we've always been saying, that there is a pull factor. We are so nice to people. I'm not suggesting that we suddenly start being incredibly cruel, but the reality is these are people who are coming, who have no right to be here, who are coming illegally, and then we are treating them better than we treat our veterans lying on the streets in London.
Absolutely. Look, let me also talk about, immigration is a huge, big issue, obviously, but also conversation about the BBC these days. But also, look, is the economy stupid? It always comes back to that. We've got the budget coming up in a couple of weeks. Rachel Reeves has, in various statements and an interview yesterday at the Beeb, she has made very strong hints. Yes, income tax is going to go up, although national insurance for workers will go down the equivalent amount. But so if you're an average earner, a low earner, you should see no difference. But higher earners, pensioners and others will see a substantial difference in their taxes. But also, crucially, she is basically saying that children shouldn't be penalised for being born into bigger families. Strongest hint yet that she's going to scrap the two-child benefit cap, which is worth best part of £1,500 a year per child over the first two you have. Is she right to do that?
Well, I think there should have been a warning that when this was started, that in 5 years' time we will stop this, or in 3 years' time we will stop this, and then that would have given people the opportunity to realise that if they go on and want to have lots of children, then the taxpayer should not have to pay for them.
But hold on a minute. When this was brought in by the Tories, they were very clear that anyone who already had children before that date were not penalised.
Oh, well, then in that case...
No, April, and it only counts for any child born after April 2017.
Well, then, I probably, a lot of your listeners viewers would disagree, but I don't think it should be removed. I think I think it's quite sensible. And, there is absolutely no reason for people to have 4, 5, 6 children. And, of course, the reason...
They can have as many kids as they want, but they don't have a right to ask the rest of us to pay for them.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. And I'm afraid there is a little bit of, there probably in some areas where there are very high proportions of people coming from a different culture who like to have more or have tended to have more children, then I think that's something that within Labour MPs who are representing those seats, perhaps they think that might not.
Well, yeah. I mean, the impact is greater. Which again, it's a terrible policy because the impact is it hits poorer families. Well, of course it does. They're the only ones claiming universal credit, and also bigger impact on ethnic minorities and immigrant families.
Exactly.
1 in 5 children born of Pakistani heritage is affected, and 1 in 4 Bangladeshi children of heritage are affected. I mean, that tells you everything. But again, at the same time, families coming to this country or being, children growing up in this country as British citizens, but asking, saying, this is how many children I want to have. Mum almost certainly in a Pakistani and Bangladeshi family, I've seen the stats on this, are unlikely to be working. The dad working but not earning enough to support that many children in this country, but they're expecting other parents, by the way, of all religions and colours, etc., to pay for their children, who then have to pay more tax and can't afford to pay to have more children of their own. There is an impact of this on other families.
Yes, it's not just the family that's directly affected, but it affects all of us. And we are going to see in this budget. I can't imagine how they think that it's going to actually help Labour's position in the polls if some of the rumours. And I don't understand why we've been, yesterday in the House of Lords, we had a Treasury Minister who every single question during the 10 minutes refused to answer, basically saying, I can't comment because we're coming up, to the budget. I can't comment. And yet, the Chancellor herself made a speech last week, which brought out all sorts of speculation. I mean, it used to be that budgets were totally nobody knew anything.
Oh yeah, and if anything was revealed, everyone involved got sacked.
You were in trouble, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the world has definitely changed. Exactly, you say it's a bit of a nonsense. So I can't say anything, except what I do say. They're trying to sort of, roll the pitch, so we're all expecting it to be very, very bad indeed. And hopefully it won't be as bad as we expect, but I have a horrible feeling it'll be even worse than we expect. And it's always...
But Julia, can I say what the best news today is, and you mentioned it earlier, is the moves from the Olympic Association, because that really is going to change so much when it comes to the discrimination and effect on
banning men from women's sport. Who'd have thought that was a controversial thing to do, eh?
I know. That shows how far down, how changed we've gone. But anyway, that was good news.
Absolutely. And we're going to be talking to the brilliant Sharon Davies about that, but I know you've always been a voice of sanity on that. So good to talk to you, going through all the big stories. Baroness Kate Hoey, independent peer, a former Labour minister as well. Tom said, I want to come back to the child benefit cap. I had a bit of a run-in with Sarah Pochin, Reform MP, a few months ago, where she appeared to think, she appeared not to know what the policy was, the reform, and I've tackled Nigel Farage both on and off air about it. But basically, this isn't the sort of the 20-odd quid or whatever it is these days. Mine's, I no longer get it, but that you get for pay a few extra costs of food and things for your kid. This is best part of 1,500 quid a year you get if you're on universal credit, which is supposed to be a credit you can get if you're working or not. Vast majority of people on it do not work, or if the ones who do don't meaningfully work. One dad working 3 days a week ain't going to pay for 5 kids, full stop, in any society. But the average family affected is losing £4,300 a year. 1 in 10 working age households with kids is impacted. Currently, it's just over 500,000 families, but it's going to go up to 790,000, basically because it doesn't affect kids born before 2017. So as those kids get older, they're not eligible for it. But as more and more kids are born, but basically it's poor families. It's largely a massive impact on ethnic minority families, particularly from immigrant heritage, largely Bangladeshi and Pakistani. This is blatant political. This is engineering by Labour, isn't it? That this is a policy that hits their voters. So they're going to scrap the cap. Well,
are they their voters anymore? Who knows? They might be wandering off to
Jeremy Corbyn,
your party, my party, Green Party, whatever. The whole selection of sort of Islamo-leftist alliances that we've seen recently. I think, to be honest, this is primarily to please Labour MPs. I think this is something which, when we had that series of U-turns over various proposed
welfare reforms.
Not even exactly. Not
they were so visible anyway.
Exactly. Making the number go up by a slightly smaller percentage each year was the sort of.
That was the big welfare reform, wasn't it? It was going to go up massively, but not quite as massively as it.
We'll slow it down ever so slightly. Yeah. So I think that's the main audience for this. I think it's one of those things which there's a lot of Labour MPs who don't have a lot of politics to them, but think that they get into politics to do things like this.
Well, they're helping poor people.
Yeah.
They're helping poor children. And if you don't want to help poor children, you're a bad person, Tom. Here's what I think. I think that if you want to help poor children, you should basically require that the parents work.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry, but why am I working to pay for your kids?
This is the problem: is that the Labour Party has gone from the party of people who work to the party of welfarism. It's got it into its head that the point of politics, the point of progressive politics, is to act like a giant NGO, a charity. It attracts sort of do-gooders in the kind of almost quasi-Victorian mould, the kind of people who used to go into the East End and tell the poor how to, look after their children. It's that kind of person who's attracted to Labour.
But also it's that whole idea that, well, the people who've got money, they can afford. Again, it's not the billionaires paying for all this stuff. It's ordinary workers who are going out. But like, but you've got money and you've only got a couple of kids, so you can afford it. But they've got 6 kids and they haven't got enough money. No, because mum and dad have gone out to work, and mum didn't get to do her full year's maternity leave because they couldn't afford to live on statutory maternity pay. She had to go back to work, and she's working part time, but they've taken a hit and they've moved somewhere smaller than they would otherwise, and they're not going to have a second or a third child because they can't afford to, because they can't afford the maternity leave, and they make all these choices, and they work every hour God sends. And dads normally, when mums cut their hours, and normally dads increase their hours to help make up the financial difference when they have kids, and they're doing everything right, and then they're told, would you mind paying for his kids down there, because it turns out he doesn't want to work more than 2 days a week. And he wants to have 6 kids. And she doesn't work at all because, well, let's face it, in some of these circumstances, Pakistani and Bangladeshi, and this is a simple matter of fact borne out by many reports over the years in terms of ability to access the workforce because of their language skills, unlikely to be speaking good enough English to get a job. And I'm sorry, that's the reality. You're basically saying, would you mind? You're going to pay more tax to pay for people who are not working and not contributing, who want to have more kids, even though it's going to probably help prevent you not being able to have the kids, the family you want. I'm sorry, the British public see through this. They are going to be hopping furious about this.
Be interested to see how it lands as well, because this is one thing that's been pretty striking, is that the Labour Party never seem to get credit for things that are aimed at pleasing one particular constituency, and also even moves that they make which might have been relatively sensible have gone down like a kind of cup of cold sick amongst another. There's so much distrust both internally and externally where the Labour Party is concerned that I don't think any of this is going to actually
anything
prove
for the left,
political positive for them.
It's never good enough. It's never unless you take every single thing from anyone earning a decent salary and you give it all to poor people. Or refugees.
They wanted wealth taxes, didn't they?
Then fundamentally it's never going to be good enough. Anyway, 12:29 is time. I'm going to take a break and then we are going to get to your calls. So, still on the BBC. This is Talk.
The fact that Keir Starmer doesn't really get it, and you talk about, you know, what the normal people in this country really believe about the BBC, well, you've only got to look at the viewing figures to find out exactly what most people do think about them, and this includes the BBC News as well, which used to be the jewel in the crown.
Yeah.
Now, so few people are watching the BBC. If you look at the 16 to 24-year-olds, only 5% of them are watching mainstream media, which includes the BBC, at all.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:32 or 33 now is the time. Let's go straight to your calls on the Beeb at 0344 499 1000. Gareth's in Derbyshire. Good afternoon, Gareth. What do you want to say?
Good morning, Julia.
Afternoon. What have you been up to?
Good afternoon, 12:33, you're right. Yeah. I'm still in my morning shift at the moment.
I know the feeling.
I just can't, I mean, for about 25 years probably, why do we need a public service broadcaster, the BBC? Because, you know, if people want to listen or watch it, they can choose to pay for it like they do other services. Like
and people do.
Sky.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't understand what they're offering that you couldn't get somewhere else.
I mean, and it used to be that you were offered something. There were some very good quality documentaries. I haven't seen. I mean, Panorama. There you go. But also there was some. You know, it was neutral news, but it's not fulfilling any of that anymore.
All those type of programmes could easily be delivered by private broadcasters, and the BBC, you know, it could split itself up and offer subscriptions for various parts of it, like local radio or.
Yeah. Well, I'd like it to get out of local radio and things, actually, because it's been a massive issue. The BBC and the local websites and things like that, it's utterly destroyed local newspapers and local radio.
Yeah.
Because you can't compete with their funding.
The other thing is I wanted to draw attention to. There's an issue, I don't know BBC use, you know, in terms of collecting licence fee money. Yeah. Because I had an experience, where a new house on a small new development, the houses were being built, and the people had not even occupied them. And the BBC or their agent were delivering debt collection letters to the houses before they'd even have kitchens in, never mind television.
I mean, I could absolutely believe that. Right, you know, I'm just doing my job, Squire. Yeah, I mean, that's madness.
Large amounts of mail to collect TV licence or ask people to subscribe before they'd even decided whether they wanted one or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's
and
just...
this was actually in a place where TV aerials don't work. But, you know, so, you know, I think there is a big issue about whether we need to have a licence fee.
Yeah, the world has moved on. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you may be right. Gareth, thank you very much indeed. James is in Staffordshire. James, what do you want to say?
Good morning, Julia.
Everyone's had a late night last night.
Sorry, Julia. Good afternoon. I didn't actually mis-edit your name either. It's two things, actually, I'd like to comment on.
Yeah, go for it.
Is it rather strange that if I object to a Bangladeshi or Pakistani or Palestine flag or pride flag, I deem to be a racist far right.
Yeah.
This, that, and the other. But somebody else who says they don't like ours is seen as a victim.
Yeah, and even if they are British or English themselves, which is really bizarre. That's an NHS story we were talking about earlier. Absolutely. What do you want to say about the Beeb?
The second comment is, I'd like you to picture the scene, 1944 D-Day. And the BBC is reporting the fact that 5,000 far-right British and American thugs have invaded the beaches of Normandy, upsetting the Germans on holiday.
Oh, I mean, you've absolutely... And also, they were probably a bit too white, those men as well, weren't they?
And there were no trans people popping off the beach either.
No. I mean...
It's a disgrace.
You do wonder. Do you know, I'd watch that. I'd love to see a sort of memes of how the BBC would have covered everything through the ages. James, great call. Thank you very much indeed. Going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to the brilliant, the wonderful Sharon Davies, an Olympic medalist herself, has one of the main campaigners on one of these big issues, and try to get this mad idea, to not let men play in women's sport. Are we finally seeing sanity in the Olympics? That's up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Afternoon, welcome back to the show. 12:39 is the time, and let's talk about the International Olympic Committee apparently moving towards what we will call sanity and common sense on the home of common sense, where they're looking towards a blanket ban for all sports on men competing in women's sport. The idea that should be news is absurd, and yet that's the mad territory we're in. But let's talk about it with a key campaigner on this issue, Sharon Davies. She's an Olympic medalist swimmer herself and author of the brilliant book Unfair Play, The Battle for Women's Sport. A good afternoon to you, Sharon.
Hello, Julia. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Delighted when I saw this news. We broke it on the show yesterday, and I said, well, get Sharon on for tomorrow. I want to talk to her about this. Tell us what's actually happening.
So basically, we've had a change of head, which I think probably a lot of people would have seen. Kirsty Coventry has come in. She was an ex-swimmer who I interviewed many times on the side of the pool instead of Tom Spack. And also we've had a change of head doctor to a lady who was an ex-international rower. So I think that's made quite a bit of difference. But I think the thing that's the biggest difference is the disastrous things that we saw at the Olympic Games in Paris last year, where we literally saw a male beating up a female in a boxing ring. And bearing in mind, yes, as sport, you know, and everybody knew it. Everybody could see it. We knew that that person had been banned from previous boxing bouts because they had failed a sex screening test. And it was obvious with our own eyes, you know, and this was literally, I felt, criminal negligence, you know, the potential for someone to be very, very seriously hurt.
Well, one of the women basically said, she after a few minutes just went, I'm out. I can't risk this man punching me in the face. And this was someone who was not trans. This was a man who'd been incorrectly identified as female when he was born.
Yeah, so this is differences of sexual development, DSD, often gets confused, but actually the end result is that that person is still male. Yeah. And in fact, World Athletics have notified us that they've had 135 male DSDs with pretty much the same male DSD, 5ARD, which is what Caster Semenya has, that have taken part in track and field since 2000. Now, the IOC removed sex screening, even though they polled their female athletes in 1998, and 2% of women, elite athletes, said, yes, please keep screening going because it keeps our category safe and fair. They removed it. And since 2000, that's how many DSD athletes have just taken part in athletics. A lot more in boxing, football, believe me. So you're talking hundreds, okay?
No, but we're told it's only a few people. Why are you being so nasty and transphobic, Sharon? It's just a few people who we should be more kind to. Why are you being horrible?
Well, I mean, the point to all of this is really how you introduced it. What is the point of having separate categories if we're going to allow any man who has a DSD and was misdiagnosed when they were born, or is a man and has decided to identify because they feel like they are a female? I don't really understand how anyone can feel like someone they're not, because you don't know what it feels like to be a female because you're not a female. But whatever, that is the point. And so women's sport was literally thrown under the PC bus in 2015.
But not men's sport, because weirdly, trans-identifying women who think that they are men, weirdly, were not queuing up to compete against men. I wonder why.
Please give me one example of a trans-identifying female that's displaced an international male athlete ever. I mean, the UN gave us a report in 2024 showing us over 600 major international medals had gone to trans-identifying men in women's sport, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
And this is the thing, and it's happening in schools, in like counties, and happening in US colleges and lots of their sports as well.
It's the message we're giving young girls. I mean, here's the most heartbreaking story I've had, and I get them weekly and daily. But a mum of an 11-year-old daughter said to me, she'd come back from a school sports day. There was one little boy that was identifying as a girl in one of the classes, so the head had decided to run a co-ed sports day. She came home from school and went, not one little girl won a race on sports day anywhere. And she said, why am I bothering, Mum? And it literally reduced me to tears, because this is the message that we are giving our young girls at the moment. They are not worthy of their own category. And that's not right. We must include everybody in sport. Absolutely.
No, exactly. But it has to be fair. It's also ignoring the reason, as you say, why women's categories were brought in. It's because men and women are different, and I'm always flabbergasted by how many times we're told, no, but if a male athlete takes down his testosterone levels, then it's not.
None of that makes any difference.
Yeah, so explain to people, explain for the hard of understanding at the back, why male athletes can pretty much always be female, because we know we've got some stats, some amazing stats put together, which I know you've quoted many times, where if you look at like the women's world record holders in many different fields, actually that world record could be beaten by the average 16-year-old,
14 to 15-year-old
male
boys.
athlete.
14 to 15-year-old boys world records are better than
difference
most of all the women's track and field, swimming, cycling world records. So literally a teenage boy, because of course by the time they're teenage boys, they're producing quite a lot of testosterone. The whole testosterone reduction thing was ridiculous, because it started at 10 nanomals, then it went down to 5 nanomals. The average elite female athlete has less than 1 nanomol. But they haven't gone through male puberty. They haven't got bigger hands and feet. They haven't got a different Q angle, which is your hips to your knees, because obviously women have childbearing hips. This makes quite a big difference to your cadence and the power and the dynamism that you can put through your lower body. So it makes a huge difference in running, jumping, cycling, kicking and swimming, anything. That means that you're using your lower half, which is pretty much everything, isn't it? So we can't remove any of that, and we have WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency. The whole point of WADA is to stop people from getting the tiniest unfair advantage, and yet we were prepared to let men go into women's sport and just say, women, suck it up.
But what amazes me is how many women were pushing this because they're being nice, but also how many women athletes sort of went along and stayed quiet. But was that because there was peer pressure and basically if you spoke out, we know certainly in American colleges, if you spoke out about having to compete in a swimming contest against Leah Thomas, 6-foot+ bloke who used to wander around with his todger swinging in the changing rooms.
Twice a day, every day those girls.
But deliberately just flaunting it. And by the way, he was a very average male swimmer, but suddenly as a competing in female sport, he was suddenly so much better. Imagine everyone's surprise. But any woman who spoke out was basically told, you're going to lose your funding. You're off the team. Is that were women intimidated into keeping quiet?
Yeah, there has been an atmosphere of fear, hasn't it? I mean, that's the thing.
People have tried to
tiny,
lose
loud
you.
minority, that make the people's lives hell. So people keep their heads down. I mean, I had another father that wrote to me and said his 15-year-old daughter was being made to play against male footballers. Now, she was quite good. She was in an elite program, and she'd started self-harming and not eating. And I said, then why do other fathers feel the same way? She said, oh, yes, all of us do. I said, well, why on earth don't you get together and stop it. This is your child.
Yeah.
And they still wouldn't do it, right? So the intimidation has been extraordinary. The silencing of people's voices. I did a Twitter poll. It's Twitter. I know it's only Twitter, but it is a reflection of the general public. And 60,000 people responded in 24 hours. And this was like 3 or 4 years ago now. And 97% said they think that women should have their own fair and safe category.
It's not controversial.
The general public have always been on side, you know, and yet here we are with very weak CEOs that are bowing to DEI hires sitting on their boards, and they're all petrified of them to turn around and to present science. Not once has the science ever supported allowing men to
and we're often told, oh, but there's some new evidence. No, the evidence was always the same.
Evidence was always there.
It's very interesting. I remember, I know she works with Sex Matters as well as you often do. Nicola Williams from Fair Play for Women, speaking to her on, we were back in an old studio in an old building back in
10 years
10 plus years ago. And absolutely fascinating. And I remember saying to her, we need to push the sport angle, 100% the sport angle, because once you get dads, men care about sport more than women on average. I'm being very general, but that is the simple case when it comes to spectators and things like that. And dads will care about it a lot more. Mums want to be nice, want everyone to like them. Dads won't care when their daughter is being, basically roughed up on the field by a boy, twice her size. And I always knew sport was going to be the real battlefield here, that we would get some sanity, and it has proven to be the case. But
we're still not winning though. There's still 34 sports here in the UK, which allows people to self-identify, right? I mean, and some of those are contact sports.
But is that not illegal now since the Supreme Court ruling?
It should be. And so we are going to start trying to push back. Myself and Tracy Edwards are going to form an organisation called the Women's Sports Union, and we are going to fight back, and we are going to try very politely to present all of the news. We are going to try very politely to tell them that they're actually don't have public liability insurance that's credible anymore because it's breaking the law. Yep. And then if they still won't listen to us, then we're going to have to go down the legal route. But because you've been talking about this for years, this is the only way that women have had open to them to push back, is to crowdfund and to constantly go to the courts.
I'm happy to help with the crowdfunding.
We've been silenced by people like the BBC. I mean, thank goodness for yourselves and GB News, and the Telegraph and the Times, who have given us a voice, because an awful lot of the mainstream media has not given women a voice. They've just thrown away our rights as if it didn't matter.
I mean, bearing in mind Women's Hour, which is a laughably offensive programme anyway to be in existence. The other 23 hours are for men. But Women's Hour, for all those years, Miss Woke Barnett never touched the trans issue once. I mean, give me a break. The biggest single issue and impact on women's rights and safety in the last 10 years, never mentioned it.
I think sadly women have just been beaten over the head with this be kind, and the be kind never ever applies to women.
Well, not you. You are, I'm your biggest fan. I mean, genuinely, Sharon Davies, you're doing a wonderful thing, not just for other top athletes like yourself, but also for, our little girls as well. Thank you so much. Sharon Davies, Olympic medalist swimmer, author of Unfair Play, The Battle of Women's Sport. Tom Slater, listening to all of that. Look, you've been absolutely staunch on this issue at Spiked as well, and Brendan O'Neill, your colleague as well. I mean, it's just sanity, but the idea we're actually having a conversation about banning men from women's sport, it's laughable.
No, exactly. Celebrating a male punching a woman in the face, celebrating women's rights being shredded in the name of progress, celebrating homophobia being given a woke makeover and let loose on society. I mean, that was the thing that alerted us to it at Spikes, which was that this thing that was supposedly so progressive seemed to be rehabilitating all of the most unpleasant old prejudices, and getting rid of very hard-won rights which previous generations of women had to fight for, and that we've seen over the past 10 years or so a kind of new generation of women have to fight for all over again. Absolutely. Because of some lunatic ideology that was allowed to take hold.
Absolutely, and it is lunatic. And again, we have a Prime Minister who, until sort of 7 seconds ago thought that, some of us had penises. I mean, I'm sorry. We haven't done it for a while. Should we do the check? Just going to check. Still haven't grown one. 12:50 is the time. I love that. Stop the sniggering at the back. But no, but that is. But apparently, if 30,000 of us do in this country, according to his stats. Yeah.
One of these days.
Then one of these days, one of us is just I'm going to wake up on a Monday morning and I'm going to find my torture. What can I say? But anyway, up next, I will let you know. There will be photos. Anyway, we're going to talk about policing matters, counter-terrorism, you name it, up next with the brilliant Mike Neville. Do stay tuned. This is Talk.
The BBC is straight down the line. There's room on the right for people like you, for people GB News, for Farage. So,
there's room for people like me, Farage, and GB News on the right. You're doing it again. The BBC.
Well, you are right, aren't you?
How would you describe the BBC?
Straight down the line, too straight down the line.
You've got to be winding me up. Have you taken something overnight, man? What's wrong with you? What?
The BBC is institutionally fair.
It's institutionally biased.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the last few moments of the show. Let's talk to Mike Neville. He's a former Metropolitan Police Detective Chief Inspector and joins us to talk about, the prevent strategy and also an amazing arrest of 145 suspects in shoplifting crackdown. Nice of the police to bother, eh, Mike?
Yes, it is, Julie, and there's all sorts of offences. It was over a week-long period in the West End, the Met crackdown on all sorts of thieving and antisocial behaviour. So it's good to see the police focusing on crime, isn't it, rather than doing silly things. So it is a step forward that thieves are being arrested, those who target women are being put in the cells.
I mean, they should have thought of this before. Can I just say that if you did a week-long crackdown in the West End and you only ended up with 140 suspects, you've not done a crackdown. I could find you 140 suspects on my local high street.
Well, absolutely. I dealt with thieves who was committing 10, 20 crimes per day, so these are very active people. And there's people go to the West End, obviously, to steal from tourists. It's an easy peasy, isn't it? And also to target the high value and low value shops. What always amazed me about society, Julie, is that one of the most shoplifted places in London is Primark on Oxford Street.
They're virtually giving it away for free. My local, I'm not joking, my local Poundland had to close down because they had so much stuff stolen. You think, I mean, really? Of all the places, if you're going to get done for shoplifting, maybe you want to go a little bit higher end. But it's also, I mean, again, still waiting, by the way, to see when they're going to actually track down the man who's accused of stealing my handbag. June last year, still waiting for that. So police are obviously busy doing other things. But I'll tell you what we are worried about is the prevent counter-terrorism strategy, though. According to a new report, an independent commission, they say that 90% of people who are referred to the strategy, which is supposed to catch people who are, danger to the society, are being turned away because they haven't got an obvious ideology. So they're saying that there's no longer keeping the country safe. It needs a radical overhaul. And this, of course, came to horrible, horrible notice of the public July last year with Axel Rudikabana, who had been referred to prevent repeatedly. But because he wasn't obviously, an Islamist or obviously a Nazi, they kind of went, nothing to do with us, Gov. And then he went on to kill 3 children and attempt to kill 8 others.
In the most brutal and horrible, wicked way as well. And I think the Al-Qaeda handbook that was found in his house sort of gives us some kind of indications here. And the other ridiculous thing, I suppose, Julie, is that also twice as many people are referred to prevent for alleged far-right activities than for Islamic terrorist matters. And we know what the real threat is to this country. There are not twice as many deaths through far-right activities as opposed to Islamic terrorism. And we've got to get...
I think like 90% of terror attacks and of deaths in this country are Islamist terrorism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without doubt, we know people are dead. You can't bluff that one out. And also these things are just woke, aren't they? We saw the ridiculous nonsense where Axel Rudikabana's headmistress said she'd been told she couldn't describe him as sinister because that's a really awful word to use about children. And saying he was carrying knives was stereotyping him because he was a young black man. So when you
who was carrying knives?
Yeah. So when you've got an organisation whose job is to prevent, really serious evil deeds being done, but it's just handicapped by these woke ideologies, and also you always got this business of, it's going to be 50-50, the far right as bad as the Islamic terrorists, and that's the idea in these people's heads, and it's got to be stopped, because what it does, it's failing the public, and really worse than that, it's allowing children to be murdered.
They've literally got blood on their hands. That's the awful truth. Mike Neville, thank you so much for that, former Met Police DCI. Tom Slater, that is the reality, isn't it? That this costs lives, this sort of wokeism.
Now, anyone who's been following the Southport inquiry, it's been one detail like this.
It's absolutely
after
harrowing,
another.
isn't it?
We knew about the 3 referrals to prevent. That was bad enough. But the fact that you had head teachers in his school who were trying to raise the alarm, were being warned off by the mental health workers because they were either being insufficiently sympathetic to his mental health needs, or, as Mike was saying, they were being somehow racially profiling by pointing out that he had knives on him. Everything you could imagine that had gone wrong there had gone wrong there.
And they won't